Introduction. The case for virtue in an indifferent universe. In an era characterized by accelerating change, profound ideological polarization, and the erosion of traditional narratives, many individuals find themselves in search of a stable and enduring foundation. Amidst climate crises, political upheaval, and the digitization of everyday life, the universe seems to offer little in the way of inherent meaning. We are left, as Albert Camus observed, face to face with the absurd, the persistent human need for meaning confronting a cosmos that offers none. It is here, in this existential tension, that the case for virtue becomes not just relevant, but vital. This book revisits, Embrace the Absurd, how Stoicism and Absurdism can help us handle the absurdity of our existence. The core ideas of what I am calling Stoic Absurdism, a synthesis of ancient Stoic philosophy and modern absurdist thought. Together, these traditions offer a compelling response to the challenges of contemporary life. Rather than seeking refuge in escapism or surrendering to nihilism, Stoic Absurdism invites us to meet chaos with character, meaninglessness with integrity, and uncertainty with courage. Stoicism, born in the markets and streets of ancient Athens, teaches that virtue is the only true good. What matters is not what happens to us, but how we respond. The Stoic path is one of resilience, clarity, and moral autonomy. Its central tenets focus on what we can control, accept what we cannot, and live in accordance with nature, remain deeply resonant in a world that often feels out of our hands. Absurdism, articulated most fully by Camus in works like The Myth of Sisyphus, confronts the apparent futility of life. The universe, it posits, is indifferent to human desire for coherence, justice, or purpose. And yet, Camus argues, this very confrontation with absurdity is what allows us to live more honestly. His famous conclusion, one must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because the struggle has meaning in a cosmic sense, but because the struggle itself becomes a site of freedom. Stoic Absurdism, then, holds the tension between these two frameworks. It refuses to deny the indifference of the universe while also refusing to be defeated by it. It acknowledges that we are not gods, we do not control the world, but we are not victims either. We are agents, and our agency is most powerful when it is grounded in virtue. In a world stripped of divine guarantees or historical inevitabilities, virtue becomes our compass. Without a predetermined path, we must decide what kind of people we want to be. This is not a burden. It is a profound opportunity. Virtue offers a framework for meaning that does not rely on metaphysical assumptions. To act justly, to speak truthfully, to love generously, and to live humbly, these are not responses to a world that makes sense. They are affirmations of who we choose to be, despite its senselessness. When we cultivate virtue, we take responsibility for our lives. We cannot control politics, weather, markets, or death. But we can control our responses. We can choose dignity over despair, presence over distraction, commitment over cynicism. Moreover, virtue connects us to others. In a fragmented and hyper-individualized culture, the ethical life reminds us that we are interdependent. Our choices ripple outward. To act with courage in the face of fear or with honesty in the face of expedience is to strengthen the moral fabric of the world, even if no one is watching. Virtue is also a stabilizer. In chaotic environments, many reach for certainty, often in the form of ideology, conspiracy, or fundamentalism. But these are false comforts. Virtue, by contrast, is steady because it does not depend on external validation. It is not about being right or winning, but about being whole. A central insight of both Stoicism and Absurdism is the paradox of control. We are not in control of most things, and yet we are in control of the most important thing, how we live. This paradox is both humbling and empowering. Humbling because it reminds us that we are not the masters of fate. Empowering because it shows us that we are not helpless. The Stoic distinction between the internals and externals helps clarify this. Internals are within our power, our thoughts, choices, values, and actions. Externals lie beyond it, other people's opinions, natural disasters, economic shifts, and even our own health to some extent. Absurdism intensifies this paradox. It says not only are externals out of our control, but the very meaning we seek may be illusory. And yet, in that space of disillusionment, we are free. Free to invent meaning, to create beauty, to love without guarantee. To focus on virtue is to focus on the one domain that always remains ours. It is to plant seeds in soil we may never fully understand, trusting not in outcomes but in process. It is to live with moral intentionality, even when results are uncertain. This is not delusion, it is discipline. This book is a call to arms, not with weapons, but with wisdom. It invites readers to step back from the noise of modern life and ask deeper questions. What kind of person am I becoming? What does it mean to live well in a broken world? What matters when nothing seems to matter? We do not pretend that virtue will solve all problems. It will not eliminate suffering, ensure justice, or save the planet. But it can change how we meet those challenges. It can transform despair into resolve and chaos into a crucible for character. The chapters that follow will explore different dimensions of this theme: the nature of courage, the role of humility, the power of honesty, the necessity of justice. They will blend ancient wisdom with contemporary insight, offering not prescriptions, but provocations. We believe that virtue is not a luxury, it is a necessity. In a time when so much feels out of control, virtue returns us to what we can control: our choices, our values, our way of being. It offers a grounded, sustainable path through the chaos. To seek virtue is to seek strength, not the loud strength of conquest, but the quiet strength of character. It is to say, even if the universe is indifferent, I am not. Even if the world is absurd, I will live with purpose. Even if nothing is guaranteed, I will act as if everything matters. That is the case for virtue, and it begins not tomorrow, but now. Chapter 1. The chaos we live in. Man is condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. Jean-Paul Sartre. I have spent much of my life searching for order in a world that constantly defies it. Like many, I was raised to believe that if I worked hard enough, made the right choices, and followed the right path, life would reward me with stability, success, and meaning. There was an implicit promise buried in these lessons, that life was, at its core, structured and fair. But the older I got, the more I realized that this was a comforting illusion. Life is not structured. It is not fair. It is not even concerned with my expectations. Chaos is the fundamental nature of existence. It manifests in personal struggles, in the instability of society, and in the vast, indifferent cosmos that surrounds us. And yet, for much of human history, we have fought to impose meaning and order onto the disorder. We have built institutions, crafted moral frameworks, and convinced ourselves that if we just adhere to the right principles, we can tame the wild, unpredictable nature of existence. But again and again, life proves us wrong. Some people experience this realization early in life, perhaps through a sudden tragedy, a loss, or a personal failure so profound that it shakes the foundations of their worldview. Others, like me, come to it more gradually, after years of seeing plans unravel, institutions fail, and personal expectations fall apart. However it arrives, the recognition of chaos is both liberating and terrifying. It is the moment when the veil is lifted, and we see life for what it truly is: unpredictable, indifferent, and completely outside our control. At first, this realization can feel like a kind of betrayal. If life offers no guarantees, if effort and virtue do not always lead to success or fairness, then what is the point of striving at all? It's tempting to fall into despair, to see existence as meaningless or unjust. I struggled with this myself, feeling at times like I had been deceived, taught to expect order in a universe that operates by no such rule. But as unsettling as this reckoning was, it also marked the beginning of a deeper, more honest engagement with life. If I could no longer rely on external structures to provide stability or meaning, then I had to find those things within myself. This shift in perspective was not immediate, nor was it easy. But over time, I came to see that embracing chaos did not mean giving up. It meant taking responsibility for how I respond to the world as it is, not as I wish it to be. If life would not promise me stability, I could cultivate inner steadiness. If meaning was not built into the fabric of existence, I could create my own. In accepting life's uncertainty, I began to see a new kind of freedom. Not the freedom of control, but the freedom to choose how I navigate the ever-changing currents of existence. For most of my life, I believed that if I planned carefully enough, I could shield myself from uncertainty. I mapped out my goals, structured my days, and tried to account for every possible obstacle. And yet, no matter how meticulous my planning, life always found a way to throw me off course. Opportunities slipped away, relationships ended unexpectedly, illnesses struck without warning. I found myself struggling against forces that I could neither predict nor control. At first, I resisted the idea that life was chaotic. I told myself that if I just worked harder or prepared more thoroughly, I could master my circumstances. But this belief only led to frustration. The more I fought against uncertainty, the more exhausted I became. I was not conquering chaos, I was drowning in it. Eventually, I had to confront a difficult truth. Control is largely an illusion. No matter how much effort I put into shaping my life, there would always be elements beyond my grasp. This realization, though painful, was also the first step toward genuine freedom. I began to see that my suffering did not come from chaos itself, but from my refusal to accept it. Letting go of the illusion of control wasn't easy. At first, it felt like giving up, as if accepting chaos meant resigning myself to a life of passivity. But I slowly began to realize that surrendering to uncertainty wasn't the same as giving up. It was a shift in focus. Instead of fixating on what I couldn't control, I started directing my energy toward what I could. My actions, my mindset, and my response to life's unpredictability. This shift didn't eliminate hardship, but it changed how I experienced it. Rather than seeing chaos as a personal failure or an enemy to be defeated, I started to see it as an unavoidable part of existence, one that I could navigate with intention rather than fear. Paradoxically, this acceptance brought a greater sense of stability than my desperate attempts at control ever had. The weight of unrealistic expectations lifted, and in their place, I found a deeper resilience. Life wasn't something to be conquered, it was something to be engaged with moment by moment. I began to appreciate the present more fully, no longer paralyzed by the fear of what might happen next. In embracing chaos, I found clarity, not in the form of certainty, but in the understanding that my strength lay not in controlling the world, but in choosing how to meet it. Beyond our personal lives, chaos is evident in the broader structures of society. We like to think that civilization is stable, that governments, economies, and institutions provide a lasting sense of order. But history tells a different story. Societies rise and fall, empires collapse, financial markets crash. What feels permanent today may be gone tomorrow. One only has to look at the world around us to see how fragile order truly is. The social and political structures we rely on are constantly shifting, often in ways we cannot anticipate. Laws change, leaders come and go, movements rise and fall. The systems we trust to provide stability, governments, economies, traditions, are themselves subject to the same chaos that governs the rest of existence. In times of crisis, this fragility becomes undeniable. Wars erupt, financial systems collapse, natural disasters disrupt entire communities. And in these moments, the illusion of stability is shattered. We are forced to confront the fact that much of what we consider order is nothing more than a temporary arrangement, subject to forces beyond our control. And yet, we cling to these structures, believing that they will shield us from uncertainty. We tell ourselves that if we follow the rules, if we participate in the right institutions, if we uphold certain traditions, we will be safe. But safety, like control, is an illusion. The world is unpredictable, and no system, no matter how well designed, can fully insulate us from its chaos. Beyond the personal and societal levels, chaos extends into the very fabric of existence itself. The universe does not care about human concerns. It does not reward virtue or punish wrongdoing. It does not provide answers to the questions we ask. It simply is, vast, indifferent, and utterly unconcerned with the lives we live. This realization is perhaps the most unsettling of all. It is one thing to accept that our personal lives are unpredictable, or that society is unstable, but to acknowledge that the universe itself is without inherent meaning is to confront the full weight of absurdity. It means letting go of the comforting idea that life has a predetermined purpose, that our struggles are part of some grand cosmic plan. This is what Albert Camus referred to as the absurd confrontation, the moment when we recognize the fundamental disconnect between our desire for meaning and the universe's indifference. We want life to make sense, to follow a narrative, to have clear purpose. But the universe offers us nothing in return. It simply exists, and we exist within it. For many, this realization leads to despair. If life has no inherent meaning, then why bother? What is the point of striving, of struggling, of living at all? But this, I have come to understand, is the wrong question. The absence of inherent meaning does not mean that life is meaningless. It simply means that meaning is not something we find. It is something we create. Throughout history, humans have sought to impose order and meaning onto existence. Religion, social structures, and personal achievements have all been used as ways to counteract the chaos of life. But time and again, these sources of meaning have proven fragile. Religions promise answers to life's uncertainties, offering the assurance of divine order and purpose. But for those who question or reject these narratives, the security they provide quickly falls apart. Social structures tell us how we should live, offering predefined roles and expectations. But these structures are arbitrary, shaped by cultural norms that shift over time. And personal achievements, career success, wealth, status, may provide temporary satisfaction, but they are ultimately fleeting. I have pursued each of these sources of meaning at different points in my life, hoping they would offer stability. I sought fulfillment in career accomplishments, in social validation, in the pursuit of external success. And for a time, these pursuits gave me a sense of purpose. But eventually they all fell short. Achievements lost their luster, social structures changed. Beliefs I once held with certainty became less convincing. It was only when I let go of the need for an external source of meaning that I found real freedom. When I stopped searching for order and instead embraced the absurdity of existence, I began to see meaning not as something to be discovered, but as something to be created. This realization didn't come easily. Letting go of the belief that meaning could be found in external structures felt like stepping into a void. If religion, society, and personal achievements couldn't provide lasting fulfillment, then what could? For a while, this question left me feeling lost, as if I had been walking a well-marked path only to find that the road ahead had vanished. But as unsettling as this was, it also presented an opportunity, a chance to build meaning on my own terms rather than inherit it from sources that had proven unreliable. At first, I resisted this responsibility. Creating meaning felt like an overwhelming task, especially in a universe that seemed indifferent to human struggles. I wanted answers, structure, reassurance that my life had inherent purpose. But the more I wrestled with these desires, the more I realized that they were remnants of an old mindset. The belief that meaning was something external, waiting to be found. Once I let go of this illusion, I discovered that meaning is not given. It is made, it is crafted in the choices I make, in the way I live, in the virtues I cultivate, despite life's inherent uncertainty. In this way, I began to see meaning not as a fixed destination, but as an ongoing process. There was no single purpose waiting to be uncovered, no universal answer to the question of why we exist. Instead, there were countless small acts of meaning-making, decisions to live with integrity, moments of connection with others, efforts to cultivate wisdom and resilience. This shift in perspective didn't erase life's chaos, but it did allow me to navigate it with greater clarity. I no longer needed the universe to provide meaning for me. I had the power to create it for myself. Chaos is unavoidable. The universe is indifferent. There are no guarantees, no fixed paths, no predetermined meanings. But rather than despairing over this reality, we have another option. We can choose how we respond. Stoic absurdism, the philosophy that guides my life, is about facing this chaos with courage and intentionality. It is about recognizing that while we cannot control the world around us, we can control how we engage with it. The answer to chaos is not retreat, nor is it blind rebellion. It is the conscious choice to live virtuously, to act with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline, regardless of the uncertainty that surrounds us. This is not a philosophy of passivity. It is not about surrendering to fate or accepting life's randomness without resistance. Rather, it is about forging meaning through action. If the universe provides no inherent purpose, then we must create our own. If stability is an illusion, then we must cultivate inner stability through virtue. If the world is indifferent, then we must choose to care, to act, and to live with integrity despite its indifference. And so I do not seek to escape chaos, I embrace it. I acknowledge it as the natural state of existence, and instead of fighting against it, I seek to move through it with strength and clarity. The world may be unpredictable, but my response to it does not have to be. By choosing virtue in the face of absurdity, I build a foundation that no external force can shake. Life does not owe us meaning, but we can create it. It does not guarantee stability, but we can cultivate it within ourselves. It does not promise fairness, but we can choose to act justly. This is the path I have chosen, and it is the path I invite others to consider, not as a way to escape chaos, but as a way to thrive within it. 5 things to consider. Chaos is the natural state of existence. Life is inherently unpredictable, and the stability we often seek is largely an illusion. No amount of planning or effort can fully shield us from uncertainty. Recognizing this truth is the first step toward true resilience. Control is an illusion, but response is a choice. While we cannot control external circumstances, personal struggles, societal instability, or the indifference of the universe, we can control how we respond. By shifting our focus from what is outside our power to what is within, we cultivate inner stability. Traditional sources of meaning are often fragile. Many of the systems we rely on for meaning, religion, social structures, personal achievements, are not as solid as they appear. They can change, fail, or lose significance over time. Instead of depending on external sources, we must take responsibility for creating our own meaning. The absurd confrontation is an opportunity, not a crisis. Accepting the absurdity of life, the disconnect between our desire for meaning and the universe's indifference, does not have to lead to despair. Instead, it presents an opportunity for liberation. Without a predetermined script, we have the freedom to define our own path. Choosing virtue in the face of chaos provides stability. The best response to an indifferent and unpredictable universe is to live virtuously. Practicing wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline allows us to build an internal foundation that remains steady, even when the external world is in flux. Reflection questions. How do I typically respond to chaos and uncertainty in my life? Do I try to control everything, avoid thinking about it, or embrace it? What external sources of meaning, e.g., career, religion, societal expectations, have I relied on in the past? Have they ever failed me, and if so, how did I respond? How do I feel about the idea that life has no inherent meaning? Does it unsettle me, or do I find it liberating? Why? What aspects of my life am I currently trying to control that might be outside my power? How would my perspective change if I focused instead on my response to these situations? What virtues, wisdom, courage, justice, or self-discipline, do I already practice, and which ones do I need to develop further in order to navigate chaos more effectively? Chapter 2. Why virtue still matters. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Viktor Frankl. For much of my life, I wrestled with the idea of meaning. Like many, I was raised to believe that meaning was something external, handed down by tradition, dictated by religion, or measured by success. But as I grew older and my experiences pushed me to question these narratives, I found myself adrift. If life was chaotic and indifferent, if there was no inherent order guiding my existence, then what was the point of striving for anything? It was in this state of uncertainty that I encountered Stoicism and Absurdism, 2 philosophies that, at first glance, seemed to contradict each other, but in reality, offered me a profound way forward. Stoicism taught me that I could control only my own actions, that I could meet life's chaos with virtue and integrity, regardless of the outcome. Absurdism, particularly through the writings of Albert Camus, reminded me that life's lack of inherent meaning did not necessitate despair, but instead called for a personal rebellion. a conscious act of creating meaning where none was given. The realization that virtue could be an answer, not because it solved life's meaning, but because it was the best way to engage with an indifferent world, changed everything for me. I no longer needed the universe to justify my actions. Living with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline was not about securing rewards or ensuring a grand cosmic plan. It was simply about living in a way that I could respect. At first, this shift in perspective was unsettling. Letting go of the idea that meaning had to come from something external left me feeling unmoored, as if I were walking without a path beneath my feet. But as I sat with this discomfort, I began to see that I had been clinging to an illusion of certainty, one that had only ever provided temporary reassurance. The idea that meaning had to be handed down, that it had to come from something larger than myself, had kept me from realizing my own power. Once I accepted that life's meaning was not something to be found, but something to be created, I felt an unfamiliar yet exhilarating sense of freedom. This freedom, however, came with responsibility. If the universe was indifferent, then it was up to me to decide how I would live, what I would value, and how I would respond to the challenges before me. Virtue became my anchor, not because it promised me security or success, but because it gave me a way to move through life with clarity and strength. Wisdom helped me navigate uncertainty. Courage allowed me to face discomfort and fear. Justice reminded me that my actions impacted others, and self-discipline ensured that I stayed true to the person I wanted to be. In an unpredictable world, these virtues became my foundation, not because they granted me control over life's chaos, but because they gave me control over myself. Many people seek meaning as if it were a problem to be solved. They look for answers in religion, in ideology, in success, in relationships, some external structure that will grant them peace and purpose. They ask, what is the meaning of life? Expecting that the answer will arrive like a key, unlocking the door to their fulfillment. And when these systems fail, as they often do, the response is either despair or nihilism. I've seen people collapse under the weight of meaninglessness, retreating into hedonism or apathy because they believe that if life has no grand purpose, then nothing matters. But this is a misunderstanding of what meaning is, and it ignores the possibility of creating meaning rather than seeking it from external sources. As Albert Camus wrote, the struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart. His words captured something profound. Meaning is not something that is granted to us, but something we create through how we engage with the world. This is where both Stoicism and Absurdism offer clarity. Stoicism doesn't require a cosmic plan to justify virtue. It simply asserts that living with integrity is the best way to face life's challenges, regardless of whether or not any higher power rewards us. The Stoics, especially figures like Epictetus, taught that virtue is the only true good. External events, including the quest for meaning through success or approval, are outside our control and not worth depending on for a sense of fulfillment. The only thing we can truly control is how we respond to life, through wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline. Absurdism, on the other hand, acknowledges that life is devoid of inherent meaning, but instead of seeing this as a cause for despair, it frames it as an opportunity. As Camus stated, "You will never live if you are looking for the meaning of life." This realization liberated me from my earlier assumptions about life's purpose. If there is no preordained purpose, then we are free to create our own. In the face of an indifferent universe, the absence of meaning is not a call to inaction, but an invitation to take ownership of our lives and actions. Without a grand design to follow, we are tasked with designing our own path, rooted in the virtue we choose to embody each day. For me, this was an incredibly freeing realization. I no longer needed to justify my actions in terms of divine reward, social validation, or long-term success. I could simply live virtuously because it was the best way to live. I didn't need the universe to tell me that wisdom was better than ignorance, or that courage was preferable to cowardice. The value of these virtues was self-evident in the way they shaped my life and my character. Even in moments of failure or suffering, these virtues became my compass, showing me that the process of living with integrity, regardless of the outcomes, was the purpose in itself. By embracing this view, I was liberated from the endless search for an external justification for my actions. I could trust that living according to my values was, in and of itself, enough to lead a meaningful life. Instead of scrambling for meaning in all the wrong places, I could focus on the things I could control: my character, my choices, and how I responded to the chaos around me. And as I began to live more intentionally, I found that this sense of meaning, derived from within rather than without, was both stable and resilient, even in a world of uncertainty. Beyond its philosophical appeal, virtue has a very practical effect. It creates stability in an unstable world. I've come to see this firsthand in my own life. When I practice wisdom, I make better decisions, avoiding unnecessary suffering. When I cultivate courage, I am able to face difficulties without being consumed by fear. Justice helps me build meaningful relationships, and self-discipline ensures that I am not a slave to my impulses. These virtues provide a solid foundation, not just in theory, but in the reality of everyday existence. They allow me to respond to the chaos of life with greater confidence and clarity, rather than reacting in ways that only add to the turmoil. There was a time when I thought of virtue as something abstract, a set of lofty ideals disconnected from everyday life. But the more I applied these principles, the more I saw their tangible effects. Wisdom, for instance, is not just about intellectual pursuits. It's about being able to step back from a situation, see it clearly, and respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. Courage is not about being fearless, but about acting in spite of fear, whether that means standing up for what's right or simply confronting an uncomfortable truth. These virtues are not distant or unreachable. They are active, lived experiences that shape our actions and interactions. The more I practiced them, the more I realized how integral they were to navigating the challenges I faced, both small and large. And while virtue benefits me personally, it also has a profound impact on the people around me. I've noticed that when I live with integrity, it strengthens my relationships. People trust those who are just and honest. They respect those who act with wisdom and courage. In a world where deception, selfishness, and short-term thinking are often rewarded, choosing to live virtuously is a quiet form of resistance. It's a way of saying that, even if the world is chaotic, I will not contribute to its disorder. As Marcus Aurelius, a Stoic philosopher, wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." By living virtuously, I show up as the kind of person I want to see in the world. This is my way of aligning my inner values with my outward actions, and it creates a ripple effect, influencing the people I interact with, whether they realize it or not. Virtue also provides me with an internal compass. Life can often feel like a whirlwind, with external pressures pushing us in different directions. Without virtue, it's easy to become lost in the noise, responding to the world with a reactive mindset, driven by fear, desire, or confusion. But by grounding myself in the principles of wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline, I've found a way to center myself amidst the chaos. When faced with difficult decisions or uncertain situations, I have learned to look inward and ask, what is the most virtuous response? This question doesn't offer a perfect solution every time, but it provides a steady guide that keeps me from being swept away by the unpredictable tides of life. Virtue also teaches me how to embrace discomfort. In a world that constantly promises comfort and convenience, the path of virtue often requires doing what is hard, not what is easy. Whether it's confronting an uncomfortable truth about myself, standing firm in my values when others may oppose them, or simply choosing to do the right thing when it would be easier to do nothing, virtue calls for courage and perseverance. As Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Virtue gives me that why, a reason to endure the inevitable suffering and challenges of life. It turns suffering into an opportunity for growth, strength, and resilience. Instead of avoiding pain or discomfort, I've learned to embrace it as part of the process of living virtuously. In doing so, I find meaning in even the most difficult circumstances. In this sense, virtue has become my response to the chaos around me. It is not a shield against hardship, nor is it a guarantee of success, but it is a way to face the world with dignity and purpose. When I live virtuously, I know I am staying true to myself, regardless of the external outcomes. It is my way of asserting order in a world that refuses to provide it. Suffering is inevitable. No philosophy can change that. Pain, loss, failure, these are all intrinsic parts of the human experience. But what philosophy can change is how we respond to suffering. And in this, I've found that virtue is a transformative force. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. This insight has guided me through some of my most challenging moments. The events that caused me pain, whether they were personal losses, failures, or disappointments, were, in a sense, beyond my control. What I could control was my response. The practice of virtue, especially in the face of hardship, has helped me cultivate resilience. Instead of being consumed by the unfairness of life, I've learned to approach suffering as an opportunity to embody the virtues that define who I want to be. There have been times in my life when I've faced profound difficulty, moments when it would have been easy to give in to despair. But in those moments, I have found that virtue offers a path forward. When I focus on wisdom, I learn from my suffering instead of being crushed by it. Wisdom, in the Stoic sense, is not merely intellectual knowledge, but practical understanding, the ability to discern what is within our control and what is not. When I practice courage, I find the strength to endure. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. In difficult moments, I have found courage in accepting that I cannot change the past or the situation, but I can control how I respond to it. When I uphold justice, I refuse to let my pain turn me into someone bitter or vengeful. This, too, is a central teaching of Stoicism. We are responsible for our actions, not our circumstances. And when I exercise self-discipline, I resist the temptation to numb my suffering in ways that would ultimately harm me. Whether it's through distractions, destructive behaviors, or avoidance, self-discipline has been key in keeping me grounded, helping me face suffering directly rather than fleeing from it. One of the most powerful lessons I've learned is that hardship can be a forge. It can shape us, refine us, make us stronger, but only if we allow it to. Marcus Aurelius, another Stoic, wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In many ways, suffering has become a catalyst for my personal growth. In facing difficult moments, I have discovered hidden reservoirs of strength and resilience within myself. But this process is not automatic. It requires a conscious choice to embrace the challenge rather than retreat from it. If we resist suffering, if we rage against it or try to escape it, we lose the opportunity for growth. Stoics teach that suffering is not something to avoid, but something to endure with grace, for in doing so, we align ourselves with our true nature, our capacity for virtue. But when we face suffering with virtue, we transform it. We turn pain into wisdom, fear into courage, hardship into resilience. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to strengthen these virtues that guide us through life's storms. This is why virtue still matters. Not because it offers an escape from chaos, but because it offers us a way to engage with it meaningfully. The philosopher Seneca argued, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." The cultivation of virtue requires effort, especially in times of difficulty. It's not about waiting for the world to change or for our problems to disappear. It's about choosing how we will respond, no matter what life throws at us. Virtue doesn't erase suffering, but it gives us the tools to bear it with dignity. By committing to wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline, we align ourselves with something greater than the momentary chaos around us. These virtues provide the internal stability that allows us to navigate the unpredictable, often harsh reality of life with integrity and strength. It doesn't impose order on the universe, but it creates order within ourselves, and in that self-created order, we find peace amidst the storm. At its core, choosing to live virtuously is an act of defiance. In a world where selfishness, dishonesty, and greed are often rewarded, living with integrity is a radical choice. In an indifferent universe, choosing to cultivate wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline is an assertion of one's own values, a way of saying that, even if nothing ultimately matters on a cosmic scale, it matters to me. This is the essence of Stoic absurdism. It is the recognition that life is chaotic and indifferent, but instead of surrendering to nihilism, we respond with intentional action. We create meaning, not because the universe gives it to us, but because we choose to live meaningfully. We cultivate virtue, not because it guarantees success or happiness, but because it is the best way to live, regardless of the outcome. For me, this has become a guiding principle. I no longer search for external validation or cosmic justification. Instead, I focus on the one thing I can control: how I live. And I have found that even in the midst of chaos, this choice brings a deep sense of fulfillment. Virtue still matters, not because the universe demands it, but because we do. 5 things to consider. Virtue is a choice, not a cosmic law. There is no universal order dictating that we must live virtuously, but we can choose to do so as the best response to life's chaos. Virtue is valuable not because the universe rewards it, but because it strengthens us and enhances our experience of life. Suffering can be a teacher. Hardship is inevitable, but how we respond to it determines its impact. When we practice wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline in the face of suffering, we transform pain into growth and resilience. Meaning is created, not given. Neither Stoicism nor Absurdism demands that life have inherent meaning. Instead, they encourage us to actively create meaning through our actions, our values, and the way we engage with the world. Virtue provides stability in an unstable world. We cannot control external circumstances, but we can control how we navigate them. By cultivating virtue, we develop inner stability, allowing us to remain grounded even when life is unpredictable and indifferent. Resisting chaos leads to more suffering. Fighting against the fundamental chaos of existence often leads to frustration and despair. Instead of resisting uncertainty, we can embrace it with integrity, choosing to respond with wisdom and courage rather than fear or nihilism. Reflection questions. How do you currently define meaning in your life? Do you seek it externally, through success, relationships, or societal expectations? Or do you consciously create it through your actions and values? How do you typically respond to suffering? Do you try to escape it, resist it, or use it as an opportunity for growth? How might practicing virtue change your approach to hardship? In what ways do you see virtue as a stabilizing force in your life? How have wisdom, courage, justice, or self-discipline helped you navigate difficult situations? What fears or doubts hold you back from fully embracing the idea that meaning must be created rather than discovered? How does this challenge the way you have been taught to think about purpose? How can you actively incorporate virtue into your daily life? What small, intentional changes can you make to live with greater wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline? Chapter 3. What does it mean to live virtuously? Happiness depends upon ourselves. Aristotle. Virtue is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot, often with a vague, moralistic weight attached to it. For a long time, I thought of it as something rigid, something imposed rather than chosen. To be virtuous, I assumed, meant following a prescribed set of rules, conforming to a predetermined model of goodness. But the deeper I explored Stoicism and Absurdism, the more I realized that virtue isn't about obedience. It's about resilience, clarity, and strength in an unpredictable world. Living virtuously isn't about blindly adhering to a moral code handed down by tradition, nor is it about seeking external validation. It's about cultivating the inner qualities that allow us to navigate life with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline. Qualities that hold value, whether or not the universe has any grand purpose for us. These virtues don't guarantee success, nor do they protect us from suffering. But they do provide a way to move through chaos with integrity and dignity. They anchor us when nothing else can. The more I examined virtue, the more I saw it not as a set of rigid rules, but as a dynamic and deeply personal way of engaging with the world. Virtue is not about seeking perfection or avoiding mistakes. It is about how we respond when we inevitably falter. A wise person is not one who never errs, but one who learns from their missteps. A courageous person does not live without fear, but rather chooses to act despite it. Justice is not about rigidly enforcing laws or social norms, but about striving to treat others with fairness and integrity, even when it is difficult. And self-discipline is not about self-denial for its own sake, but about aligning our actions with our values, rather than being controlled by fleeting emotions or desires. When I stopped seeing virtue as a set of external expectations and started treating it as an internal practice, everything changed. I no longer pursued virtue to meet some societal standard of goodness. I pursued it because it made my life richer, stronger, and more meaningful. Virtue became less about proving something to the world and more about creating a solid foundation for myself. Even in moments of failure, I found that returning to these principles gave me clarity and direction. In a world that often feels arbitrary and chaotic, virtue became my way of asserting that my actions still mattered, even if the universe was indifferent to them. This realization helped me see that virtue is not about control, but about response. We cannot dictate what life throws at us, but we can determine how we meet it. And in that choice lies our freedom. The ancient Stoics understood this well. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, reminds us that while we cannot control external events, we can always control our judgments and reactions. This is why virtue matters. It is not a tool to reshape the universe according to our wishes, but a means of shaping ourselves so that no matter what happens, we can stand firm, act wisely, and live with integrity. Defining virtue in a modern context. At its core, virtue is about living in alignment with principles that make life worth living, regardless of external circumstances. But what does that actually mean in practical terms? How do wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline manifest in daily life? Wisdom is more than just intelligence or knowledge. It's the ability to see reality clearly, to understand consequences, and to act thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. In modern life, wisdom means recognizing that our emotions don't always tell us the truth, that not every battle is worth fighting, and that learning never truly ends. It's about knowing when to speak and when to listen, when to push forward and when to step back. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. It's easy to think of courage in dramatic terms, running into a burning building, standing up against oppression. But in daily life, courage often looks much quieter. It's having a difficult conversation instead of avoiding it. It's making choices that align with your values, even when they're unpopular. It's acknowledging your own shortcomings and committing to growth despite discomfort. Justice is often framed in grand societal terms, but at its heart, it's about fairness, integrity, and the way we treat others. It's resisting the temptation to act selfishly at the expense of others. In a world that rewards dishonesty and self-interest, choosing to act justly, whether in personal relationships, in the workplace, or in the broader community, is a radical act. Self-discipline is what keeps us grounded when everything else feels unstable. It's the ability to delay gratification, to act according to long-term values rather than short-term impulses. In a culture obsessed with convenience and instant rewards, self-discipline is a quiet form of rebellion. It's choosing to build something meaningful instead of chasing fleeting pleasures. One of the biggest misconceptions I had about virtue was that it was synonymous with obeying rules. As long as I followed the guidelines set by society, religion, or authority figures, I assumed I was living virtuously. But over time, I realized that virtue isn't about compliance, it's about intention. There's a significant difference between following rules because we fear consequences and choosing to live by principles because we believe in them. Rules are external, often arbitrary, and subject to change based on culture or circumstance. Virtue, on the other hand, is internal. It's something we cultivate within ourselves, independent of societal expectations. This distinction became clear to me in moments when doing what was right by conventional standards didn't align with what was just or wise. There have been times when honesty was inconvenient, when speaking the truth disrupted harmony, when standing up for fairness meant risking personal loss. In those moments, I had to ask myself, am I making choices because they're easy or because they're virtuous? Living virtuously requires reflection. It asks us to examine our motivations and question whether our actions stem from true conviction or mere habit. It's not about perfection, far from it. It's about striving, about aligning our actions with the person we want to be, even when no one is watching. I began to see that true virtue often requires discomfort. It's easy to follow the rules when they align with convenience or personal gain, but what about when they don't? What about when virtue demands sacrifice? There have been times in my life when I've faced difficult choices, when telling the truth meant facing conflict, when doing the right thing meant standing alone. In those moments, I understood that virtue isn't about external rewards or punishments. It's about maintaining self-respect. It's about being able to look at myself honestly and know that I acted with integrity, even if no one else recognized it. This is what makes virtue such a powerful anchor. Unlike rules, which can shift based on social trends or institutional authority, virtue is something we carry within us. It requires constant refinement and self-examination, but it remains ours no matter how the world around us changes. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, emphasized this point. No man is free who is not master of himself. True freedom doesn't come from following a prescribed set of rules. It comes from having the inner strength to determine our own path, guided by principles rather than fear or conformity. At its core, living virtuously is a deeply personal endeavor. It is not about achieving some objective standard of goodness or moral perfection. It is about cultivating the qualities that make us resilient in the face of chaos, that allow us to navigate an unpredictable world without losing ourselves. When we stop thinking of virtue as an obligation and start seeing it as a path to strength, clarity, and meaning, we begin to understand its true purpose. It is not about following, it is about becoming. Life is unpredictable. Plans unravel, institutions fail, people disappoint us. No amount of effort can change the fundamental chaos of existence. But what we can change is how we respond to it. For me, virtue has become the one stable thing in an unstable world. When I feel lost, when circumstances shift beyond my control, I remind myself that I can always choose how I show up in the moment. No matter what happens, I can choose to act with wisdom rather than impulsivity. I can choose courage over avoidance, justice over selfishness, discipline over recklessness. This doesn't mean I always succeed. There are days when I fail miserably at living up to my own values. But the beauty of virtue is that it isn't about achieving some flawless state. It's about the ongoing process of striving toward something better. And in that striving, I find a sense of meaning that isn't dependent on external validation. When faced with uncertainty, it's tempting to grasp for control. We try to predict outcomes, cling to rigid beliefs, or seek comfort in distractions. But I've found that true stability doesn't come from external security. It comes from knowing that, no matter what happens, I will face it with integrity. This realization has reshaped how I approach challenges. Instead of resisting uncertainty, I've learned to meet it with a steady mind. Wisdom helps me recognize what is within my control and what is not. Courage allows me to step into discomfort rather than shy away from it. Justice reminds me that my actions affect others, that I have a responsibility beyond my own fears and desires. And self-discipline ensures that I don't let fleeting emotions dictate my choices. Virtue is not about erasing chaos, it's about giving myself the tools to navigate it with purpose. There was a time when I believed that meaning had to come from something external, that I needed life to make sense before I could find stability. But I now see that stability comes from within. It isn't about eliminating doubt or uncertainty. It's about cultivating the kind of character that can endure them. When I focus on virtue, I am not at the mercy of circumstances. Even in failure, even in suffering, I can hold on to something real, the effort to act with integrity, no matter how small the moment. And in this, I've discovered something unexpected. Freedom. The less I tie my sense of self to outcomes beyond my control, the more I am able to live fully. Virtue is not a set of constraints. It is a foundation. It allows me to engage with life, not from a place of fear, but from a place of strength. No matter what changes around me, I know who I am choosing to be. And that is enough. Throughout history, philosophers have wrestled with what it means to live well. The Stoics believed that virtue was the highest good, the only thing truly within our control. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This idea has guided me through countless struggles. If I can't control the chaos of the world, I can at least control how I meet it. Socrates argued that virtue was tied to self-examination, that the unexamined life was not worth living. Aristotle saw virtue as a habit, something developed through practice rather than innate goodness. And Camus, through Absurdism, rejected the idea that virtue needed cosmic justification at all, arguing instead that we must create meaning through our choices. What all of these perspectives have in common is the idea that virtue is not about passively accepting a set of rules, but about actively engaging with life. It's about questioning, refining, and choosing, again and again, the kind of person we want to be. This understanding of virtue has shifted my focus from seeking external validation to cultivating inner strength. Instead of measuring my worth by success, status, or approval, I measure it by my ability to act in alignment with my values. I've come to see that living well isn't about chasing some final state of perfection, but about the ongoing effort to respond to life with integrity. There will always be obstacles, temptations, and failures, but virtue isn't about never faltering. It's about getting back up, learning, and striving to do better. This is where Aristotle's idea of virtue as a habit becomes so important. Just as a musician improves through daily practice, or an athlete strengthens their body through consistent training, virtue is something we develop through repeated action. Wisdom is sharpened every time we pause to think before reacting. Courage is strengthened each time we face discomfort instead of avoiding it. Justice grows when we choose fairness over self-interest, and self-discipline deepens when we resist short-term gratification for long-term growth. Virtue isn't a single decision. It's a way of living, reinforced through countless small choices. And yet, I've also learned that virtue cannot exist in isolation. It must be tested in the real world, in the messiness of relationships, responsibilities, and ethical dilemmas. It's easy to talk about wisdom in theory, but much harder to practice it when emotions are running high. Courage sounds noble until fear grips you in the face of real risk. Justice is admirable in principle, but acting justly often requires sacrifice. The challenge and the beauty of virtue is that it is not abstract. It is deeply personal, shaped by the moments when we must choose who we are becoming. The practical side of virtue. Understanding virtue philosophically is one thing. Living it is another. In my own life, I've found that the best way to cultivate virtue isn't through grand gestures, but through small daily actions. Practicing wisdom means pausing before reacting, questioning assumptions, and learning from mistakes. It's about seeking understanding rather than validation. Exercising courage might mean speaking up in a difficult situation, embracing discomfort for the sake of growth, or taking responsibility when it's easier to shift blame. Acting justly requires listening to others, considering different perspectives, and making choices that align with fairness, even when they don't benefit us personally. Developing self-discipline is about creating habits that serve our long-term values, choosing consistency over short-term gratification, and showing up even when motivation wanes. The more I integrate these practices into my life, the more I see their impact. Virtue is not just a philosophical ideal, it's a lived experience, a daily commitment to something greater than convenience or comfort. In a world that often feels chaotic and indifferent, virtue remains one of the few things truly within our control. It doesn't promise rewards, nor does it shield us from suffering. But it does offer something even more valuable, a way to engage with life meaningfully, to cultivate strength in uncertainty, and to create a foundation that no external force can shake. To live virtuously is not to live easily. It requires effort, reflection, and a willingness to act with integrity even when it's difficult. But the alternative, a life dictated by impulse, fear, or external expectation, feels far less fulfilling. Virtue is not a destination, but a practice, a lifelong process of becoming. And in that process, I have found something that no external achievement, no societal approval, and no illusion of control could ever provide, a sense of purpose that is wholly my own. 5 things to consider. Virtue is an active choice, not passive rule-following. Living virtuously is not about blindly adhering to external moral codes, but about consciously choosing wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline in everyday life. Virtue provides stability in an unstable world. While life is unpredictable and full of chaos, our character remains within our control. Choosing to act with integrity offers a sense of inner stability when external circumstances shift beyond our control. Virtue is cultivated through practice, not perfection. Just as a skill is developed through repeated effort, virtue is strengthened through consistent, intentional action. Failure is inevitable, but each moment presents an opportunity to realign with our values. True virtue requires self-examination. As Socrates argued, the unexamined life is not worth living. Virtue demands that we question our motives, challenge our assumptions, and continually refine our understanding of what it means to live well. Virtue must be tested in real-world challenges. It's easy to talk about wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline in theory, but their true value is revealed in the difficult moments when we must make choices that test our character. Reflection questions. In what ways do I tend to follow external rules rather than consciously choosing my own principles? How do I respond when faced with uncertainty or chaos? Do I act with wisdom and integrity, or do I seek control and comfort? Which of the four virtues, wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline, do I struggle with the most, and why? Can I think of a time when I acted virtuously despite external pressures or personal discomfort? What did that experience teach me? How can I make virtue a daily practice rather than just an abstract ideal? What specific actions can I take to embody these principles in my life? Chapter 4. Wisdom, seeing clearly in the fog of uncertainty. Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Aristotle. For most of my life I misunderstood wisdom. I thought it was the same thing as intelligence, or maybe cleverness. A sharp mind capable of solving problems, answering questions, or winning arguments. But I've since come to realize that wisdom has very little to do with being the smartest person in the room. It's not about knowing all the answers. If anything, it's about understanding just how many questions don't have answers at all. Wisdom, I've learned, is about clarity, about seeing through the fog of life with a kind of calm, grounded perspective. It's about recognizing that we live in an unpredictable world, where events often unfold in ways that are beyond our control or comprehension. And instead of panicking in the face of that uncertainty, wisdom helps us navigate it with grace. There have been times in my life when everything felt like it was unraveling, when plans I'd made with care fell apart, when people I trusted let me down, when the future felt impossibly unclear. In those moments, I used to react with fear, frustration, or blame. But now, when I can access wisdom, I try to pause. I try to ask myself, what's really happening here? What do I actually know, and what am I assuming? What's in my control? That simple pause has changed so much for me. Wisdom, as I see it now, is the ability to step back from the heat of the moment and look at life from a wider angle. It's not about detachment in the cold, indifferent sense. It's about developing enough inner steadiness that we can respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. It's the quiet voice that says, "This is painful, yes, but it's not the end." Or, "This feels urgent, but maybe it's not as urgent as you think." One of the most liberating insights I've come to embrace is that wisdom isn't a fixed trait. It's not something you either possess or lack. It's a practice, a discipline, a way of engaging with life. Wisdom is cultivated gradually, often in quiet, painful increments. Like a garden, it grows best in the soil of difficulty, when comfort has been stripped away and we are left with the raw truth of our experiences. Pain has a way of sharpening our vision. It can remove our illusions, challenge our assumptions, and, if we let it, open the door to deeper understanding. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. I've found this to be profoundly true in my own life. The moments that have brought me to my knees have also been the ones that pushed me toward clarity. Wisdom isn't forged in certainty, it's born in the crucible of challenge, where we are forced to confront not just the world, but ourselves. One of the key ways I try to nurture this kind of wisdom is through self-reflection. Not the punishing, hypercritical voice that shames you into paralysis, but the quiet, honest inquiry that asks, what can I learn from this? After an argument, a mistake, or a moment of weakness, I don't try to pretend it didn't happen. I try to examine it. I ask, what was I feeling? Why did I react that way? What pattern is emerging here that I've seen before? Over time, these questions have helped me see myself more clearly, not as a failure to be fixed, but as a work in progress. Socrates famously declared, "The unexamined life is not worth living." It's a stark claim, but one that has rung true the more I've lived it. Without self-examination, we risk becoming prisoners of our own unconscious habits. We repeat the same mistakes, act from fear or ego, and miss opportunities to grow. But when we slow down, reflect, and listen, not just to others, but to our own reactions, we open a space where transformation becomes possible. Self-reflection demands humility. It asks us to recognize that we don't have all the answers, that our perceptions are shaped by our biases, and that our impulses often lead us astray. That's not an easy thing to accept, especially in a world that encourages certainty, dominance, and constant projection of control. But wisdom lives in the space where control fades and curiosity takes its place. As Epictetus once said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." I've had to let go of the version of myself that needed to always be right, always be in control, always have things figured out. That version of me couldn't grow, because he couldn't admit he had something to learn. It's only when I started to embrace uncertainty that I truly began to learn. Wisdom doesn't make you invulnerable. It makes you more willing to be vulnerable in the right ways, at the right times. It doesn't promise answers. It gives you the strength to keep asking better questions. And sometimes, wisdom means laughing at yourself. Not in a cruel or dismissive way, but with lightness and grace. There's something deeply wise about humor, especially the kind that sees the absurdity of our efforts to control the uncontrollable. As Camus wrote, "A man's work is nothing but this slow trek to rediscover, through the detours of art, those 2 or 3 great and simple images in whose presence his heart first opened." For me, some of those detours have been painful, some ridiculous, but all have taught me something essential. Another powerful ingredient of wisdom is open-mindedness. We live in a world that often prizes confidence over curiosity, where having strong opinions is mistaken for strength of character. But I've come to believe that real strength lies in being willing to question your assumptions, to listen deeply to others, and to remain open to changing your mind. I've had moments where someone I disagreed with deeply said something that challenged me, not because they won the argument, but because I allowed myself to consider a view I hadn't fully understood. Wisdom doesn't close doors, it opens them. Perspective is everything. It's amazing how 2 people can go through the same event and interpret it completely differently. Where one sees betrayal, the other sees miscommunication. Where one sees failure, the other sees a learning opportunity. The facts don't change. What changes is the lens through which we see them. And that lens, more than anything else, determines how we experience our lives. Wisdom is what helps us adjust the lens. Sometimes I think of wisdom as a kind of emotional compass. It doesn't eliminate fear or anger or sadness. It just helps me orient myself so that I don't get lost in those emotions. I can feel grief without letting it destroy me. I can feel anger without letting it control me. I can acknowledge uncertainty without spiraling into anxiety. That kind of stability doesn't come from denying emotions. It comes from understanding them and learning how to move with them rather than against them. One of the most surprising things I've learned about wisdom is how closely it's tied to humor. At first glance, they might seem unrelated. Wisdom is often portrayed as serious, stoic, even solemn. But in my experience, humor, especially the kind that gently exposes our contradictions and limitations, is one of the most potent expressions of wisdom. It's the ability to laugh at ourselves without cruelty, to recognize the absurdity of life without becoming bitter. There have been moments in my life where things went so wildly off course that all I could do was laugh. Not because the situation was funny in any conventional sense, but because laughter was a release, a recognition that I was clinging to expectations in a universe that doesn't promise to meet them. That moment of laughter often gave me just enough distance to see things more clearly. It reminded me that I'm not the center of the universe and that my suffering, while real, is part of something much bigger than me. Camus once said, "A man's work is nothing but this slow trek to rediscover, through the detours of art, those 2 or 3 great and simple images in whose presence his heart first opened." I think wisdom is part of that same trek. It's about returning, again and again, to the core truths that we often forget in the noise of modern life. That we are fragile, that we are not in control, and that life is both precious and absurd. Humor lets us hold these truths lightly, without pretending they don't matter, but without letting them crush us either. Of course, wisdom doesn't come quickly. It isn't something we're born with, and it isn't something we can fake. It's earned, often through failure, heartbreak, and the willingness to pay attention. Some of the wisest people I know are those who've endured great suffering without becoming cynical. They've lost things, sometimes everything, but instead of shutting down, they've opened up. They've learned to live without illusions, and yet they still find ways to be kind, curious, and generous. I think a lot about what it means to see clearly in a world like ours. We're surrounded by noise, opinions, predictions, advice, fear. Everyone seems to be shouting, and in that noise, it's easy to lose our inner clarity. Wisdom is quiet. It doesn't rush to conclusions. It doesn't need to be right all the time. It listens more than it speaks. And when it does speak, it does so with humility, not arrogance. Practicing wisdom has also changed how I relate to other people. I used to think that being wise meant having the right answers. Now I think it means asking better questions. It means really listening, not just waiting for my turn to talk. It means recognizing that every person I meet is struggling with something, and that I know far less about their inner world than I assume. Wisdom slows me down. It softens my judgments. It helps me meet others not with superiority, but with compassion. There's also a kind of courage in wisdom. It takes courage to admit what we don't know, to sit with uncertainty without rushing for certainty. It takes courage to face hard truths about ourselves, our biases, our fears, our patterns. And it takes courage to live thoughtfully in a world that often rewards quick answers and surface-level thinking. Wisdom isn't flashy, but it's fierce. It demands that we be honest with ourselves, even when it's uncomfortable. I've noticed, too, that wisdom often means stepping outside of our immediate emotions, not suppressing them, but creating enough space between the feeling and the response to choose how we want to act. It's easy to lash out when we're angry, to shut down when we're afraid. But wisdom whispers, wait, look again. What's really happening here? That pause, that breath, is often the difference between regret and growth. And in the deepest sense, wisdom is about aligning ourselves with reality, not with how we wish things were, but with how they actually are. That doesn't mean giving up on ideals or dreams, but it means holding them with awareness. We can strive to make the world better while still acknowledging its imperfections. We can grieve the gap between what is and what could be, without pretending the gap doesn't exist. When I look back at my own life, I can see how wisdom has grown slowly, like a tree pushing its roots deeper over time. I've learned from my missteps, from people who challenged me, from books that shattered my assumptions. But I've also learned from silence, from quiet moments when I stopped running, stopped performing, and just sat with myself. Sometimes wisdom comes not from doing, but from simply being present. And here's something else I've noticed. Wisdom tends to show up more in questions than in answers. What really matters here? What part of this is within my control? What does it mean to act with integrity in this moment? These are the kinds of questions that have guided me when nothing else made sense. They don't always lead to neat solutions, but they do point me in the direction of clarity. So much of life is spent trying to avoid uncertainty. We build routines, seek stability, chase answers. But I've come to believe that the real work is learning to see clearly within the uncertainty, to find perspective not by escaping chaos, but by standing calmly inside it. That's what wisdom makes possible. It doesn't eliminate the fog, but it gives us the tools to move through it with grace. And perhaps most importantly, wisdom allows us to be at peace with our limits. It reminds us that we don't have to have everything figured out, that it's okay to change our minds, that growth is not linear, that being wrong isn't failure, it's part of learning. This kind of humility isn't weakness, it's strength. because it frees us to keep growing. If I had to define wisdom in one sentence, I'd say it's the practice of seeing clearly and acting thoughtfully, not perfectly, not without struggle, but with intention and awareness. It's a way of walking through the fog of life with open eyes and a steady heart. 5 things to consider. Wisdom is not the same as knowledge. You can accumulate facts, read books, and win debates, and still lack wisdom. Wisdom is about discernment, knowing when to speak and when to listen, when to act and when to wait. It's about seeing the bigger picture and understanding the deeper context, especially in moments of tension or confusion. Perspective is power. How we interpret life's chaos often matters more than the chaos itself. Wisdom gives us the ability to reframe challenges, to step back and ask, what else might be true here? It shifts us from reaction to reflection, and that shift can change everything. Wisdom requires humility. A wise person doesn't cling to being right. They remain open to being wrong. They understand that their view is limited and that growth comes from curiosity, not certainty. Humility allows us to learn, adapt, and genuinely connect with others. Humor is a form of wisdom. Laughing at the absurdity of life isn't a betrayal of seriousness, it's a way to endure it. Humor offers distance, perspective, and relief. It's not about dismissing suffering, but about recognizing that we're all stumbling through the same strange, unpredictable world. Wisdom is a daily practice, not a destination. There's no point at which we arrive at wisdom. It's something we cultivate in ordinary moments. By choosing patience over frustration, listening over lecturing, clarity over ego. Every challenge is an invitation to respond with greater depth and thoughtfulness. Reflection questions. When faced with uncertainty or chaos, do I tend to react impulsively or reflect thoughtfully? What patterns have I noticed in my responses? What does seeing clearly mean to me, and how do I cultivate that kind of perspective in my daily life? Am I willing to admit when I might be wrong? How do I respond when my beliefs or assumptions are challenged? In what ways has humor helped me reframe difficult situations or find light in dark moments? How might I use humor more intentionally as a tool for resilience? How do I define wisdom, not intellectually, but in practice? Who in my life embodies this kind of grounded clarity, and what can I learn from them? Chapter 5. Courage, facing chaos with strength and resilience. The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Albert Camus. Courage is often envisioned as the dramatic heroism of warriors charging into battle or individuals performing extraordinary feats under pressure. However, a deeper exploration reveals that true courage encompasses more than singular acts of bravery. It embodies the enduring strength to confront life's inherent absurdity and persist despite its challenges. In the philosophies of Stoicism and Absurdism, courage is redefined as the resilience to face a world that may seem indifferent or devoid of inherent meaning. The Stoics identified courage as one of the 4 cardinal virtues, essential for living a virtuous life. They believed that while we cannot control external events, we can control our responses to them, and it is through this control that we exercise true courage. Marcus Aurelius, a Stoic philosopher and Roman emperor, wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This perspective emphasizes that courage is not about changing the world, but about maintaining inner strength in the face of external chaos. Similarly, absurdism, as articulated by Albert Camus, confronts the conflict between human search for meaning and the universe's silent indifference. Camus suggested that acknowledging this absurdity requires a form of courage, continuing to search for meaning and live authentically, despite recognizing life's inherent lack of it. He stated, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart." One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Here, Camus portrays Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder uphill for eternity, as an emblem of courageous endurance, finding contentment in the struggle itself. Many encounter the pervasive fear of meaninglessness, the unsettling notion that our efforts and existence might ultimately lack purpose. This fear can be paralyzing, leading to existential despair or inaction. Yet courage manifests in our ability to act despite this fear. to create our own meaning through our choices and actions. Existentialist philosopher Søren Kierkegaard referred to this confrontation as the leap of faith, the decision to believe in something greater than oneself in the absence of definitive proof. While Kierkegaard's leap was toward religious faith, the concept can be broadened to encompass any commitment to personal values or goals despite uncertainty. It is through this leap that individuals assert their agency and define their own purpose. Moreover, Friedrich Nietzsche challenged individuals to embrace the uncertainties of life, proposing the idea of amor fati, or the love of one's fate. He encouraged embracing all aspects of existence, including suffering and chaos, as essential components of life. Nietzsche wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity." This radical acceptance requires courage, as it involves confronting life's unpredictability without retreating into denial or despair. Abstract philosophical concepts gain profound significance when embodied in real-life actions. Throughout history and into the present, individuals have exemplified courage by confronting adversity with resilience and determination. Consider Malala Yousafzai, who, after surviving an assassination attempt by the Taliban for advocating girls' education in Pakistan, continued her activism on a global scale. Her unwavering commitment to education and women's rights, despite life-threatening opposition, illustrates profound courage. Similarly, Nelson Mandela's perseverance through 27 years of imprisonment for opposing apartheid in South Africa demonstrates remarkable endurance. Upon his release, rather than seeking retribution, Mandela led efforts toward reconciliation and nation-building, embodying the strength to transform personal suffering into societal progress. In the realm of sports, tennis player Rafael Nadal's career is marked by his relentless determination to overcome injuries and setbacks. Known for his tenacity on the court, Nadal's ability to confront physical limitations and continue competing at the highest levels serves as a testament to enduring courage. As noted in a recent The New Yorker profile, his career, marked by exceptional determination and the will to fight through numerous injuries, is nearing its end as he can no longer perform with the same agility and power. While the aforementioned examples highlight extraordinary instances of courage, it is equally vital to recognize and cultivate courage in our daily lives. Everyday courage involves confronting personal fears, making difficult decisions, and standing by one's values, even when faced with opposition or uncertainty. Acknowledging our vulnerabilities and embracing them is a courageous act. It requires honesty with oneself and others, fostering deeper connections and personal growth. As researcher Brené Brown asserts, vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Stepping out of comfort zones to initiate change or pursue goals demonstrates courage. This could be as simple as starting a conversation with a stranger, voicing an unpopular opinion, or embarking on a new career path. Each act of initiative builds resilience and confidence. Viewing failure not as a defeat, but as a stepping stone to success requires courage. It involves reframing setbacks as opportunities for growth and understanding that mistakes are integral to the learning process. As Winston Churchill famously said, "Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." Advocating for others, especially in the face of injustice, exemplifies moral courage. It involves risking personal comfort to support those who are marginalized or oppressed. Historical figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and contemporary activists continue to inspire through their commitment to justice and equality. Regular self-reflection and mindfulness practices can enhance self-awareness and emotional resilience, which are essential for cultivating courage. When we develop the habit of pausing, observing our emotions, and understanding our internal reactions to the world, we can choose our responses more wisely. This isn't always easy, especially when fear, shame, or doubt flood the system. But it's in these moments that courage becomes most essential. In my own life, everyday courage rarely looks like dramatic confrontation. More often, it means being honest when it's uncomfortable, staying present in difficult conversations, or making decisions that don't guarantee approval. It means not turning away from pain, whether mine or someone else's. And most importantly, It means refusing to become cynical when things don't go as planned. As Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Courage is that reaction, a steady resolve to meet each challenge with as much integrity as we can muster. Sometimes courage looks like continuing. There are days when getting out of bed, showing up for our responsibilities, or choosing kindness over irritation feels monumental. And yet, these quiet, consistent acts of perseverance shape who we are. They reinforce the understanding that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." That, to me, is the heart of courage. Albert Camus believed that courage was essential in an absurd world. When we recognize that life has no intrinsic meaning, and yet we choose to keep living, creating, loving, and acting as if our choices matter, that is courage. Camus did not advocate despair in the face of meaninglessness. On the contrary, he saw in it a powerful opportunity to rebel not against life, but against nihilism. In the myth of Sisyphus, he described the absurd hero as someone who lives without appeal, who does not seek false hope or illusions, but faces reality with clarity and defiance. This absurd courage is profoundly liberating. If there is no grand script, then we are free to write our own. But freedom, as Sartre warned, can be a terrifying burden. We are condemned to be free, he said, and that freedom comes with the weight of responsibility. Courage, then, becomes the essential bridge between existential awareness and authentic living. We must choose, again and again, to engage, to act, to love, even in the face of uncertainty. What does that look like practically? It means having the courage to create art even if no one sees it, to show up for relationships even when they're messy, to speak truth in a world flooded with misinformation, to take care of your mental health even when the world demands productivity. Every one of these choices, no matter how small, is a kind of rebellion against the void. It's saying, I will live, not because life guarantees me anything, but because I choose to be alive. We often speak of courage as a mental or emotional quality, but it also lives in the body. The stress we feel in moments of fear or doubt manifests physically. Tight shoulders, shallow breath, clenched fists. Learning to regulate our nervous system, to breathe deeply, move intentionally, and ground ourselves in our senses is a form of physical courage. It teaches us to stay present, even when everything in us wants to flee or freeze. This is why practices like martial arts, yoga, long-distance running, or cold water plunges can be powerful teachers of courage. They train the body to stay with discomfort, to endure pain without panicking, to move forward with strength even when depleted. And this physical discipline often translates into mental resilience. The body, after all, does not lie. When we condition it to withstand pressure, we build an internal reservoir of strength that shows up in all areas of life. Seneca wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage. Survival itself can be an act of resistance. Showing up in your body, caring for it, and refusing to abandon it to apathy or despair, that's courage too, especially in a culture that often separates the mind from the body. Reclaiming the physical experience of bravery is essential. We are not just thinking beings, we are living, breathing organisms that carry our courage in our spine, our breath, our heartbeat. In moments of crisis, the body becomes the front line of experience. Long before we can articulate fear or rationalize it away, the body knows. Our muscles tense, our stomach churns, our breath becomes rapid and shallow. These physiological responses are not signs of weakness. They are signs that the body is doing its best to protect us. But left unchecked, they can also trap us in cycles of reactivity. To face fear with courage means learning to speak the body's language. It means meeting those signals not with suppression, but with awareness, softening the jaw, slowing the breath, loosening the grip. This isn't just calming down, it's choosing presence in the very space where fear first appears. The ancient Stoics understood the importance of embodiment, even if they didn't use modern language for it. Epictetus, a former slave turned philosopher, emphasized that we should concern ourselves only with what lies within our control. our thoughts, our intentions, and, importantly, our reactions. And what are reactions if not a blend of mind and body? To respond rather than react is to practice a kind of bodily courage, a stillness that's earned through effort. The Stoics taught that courage wasn't about denying fear, but about mastering it, not by force, but by discipline. And that discipline often begins with the body. This is why physical rituals matter so much, especially in times of emotional uncertainty. Whether it's walking in nature, swimming in cold water, lifting weights, dancing, or even just standing tall with shoulders back and breath steady, these embodied practices remind us that we are here, we are alive, and we are capable. They teach us that courage isn't always a roar. Sometimes it's a breath taken in the midst of panic. Sometimes it's the decision to move even when your knees tremble. In this way, the body becomes not just a vessel for courage, but a teacher of it. Courage is not only something we cultivate for ourselves, it's something we pass on. Whether we're parents, teachers, coaches, or simply people in community with others, we have the opportunity to model what courage looks like. And that modeling often speaks louder than any advice or philosophy. To teach courage is to show that fear is normal, but it doesn't have to be in charge. It's to validate uncertainty, but also to demonstrate perseverance. Children especially are attuned not just to our words, but to how we act under pressure. If we react to stress with rage or withdrawal, they learn avoidance. If we face hardship with steadiness and compassion, they internalize that as a template for their own lives. This doesn't mean pretending to have it all together. In fact, showing vulnerability while still moving forward is one of the most powerful lessons we can offer. When we say, "I'm scared, but I'm going to try anyway," we normalize the complexity of courage. As Maya Angelou said, courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. Without courage, wisdom falters, justice stalls, and discipline withers. It is courage that activates everything else. Courage is a living, breathing force that doesn't just reside in individual moments. It ripples outward, shaping those around us. As adults, we are the carriers of this strength, passing it on to the next generation through our actions, our words, and even our silence. To quote the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre again, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." Our lives serve as the canvas upon which courage is painted, not just in grand gestures, but in everyday acts. Whether we are comforting a friend through grief, facing uncertainty at work, or standing up for what is right despite opposition, we create examples of courage that others can follow. Socrates, in his dialogues, often discussed the idea of virtue being something that must be demonstrated, not just taught abstractly. His life was a living testament to his philosophy. He stood unwavering in the face of death, teaching that wisdom and virtue are rooted not in avoidance of discomfort, but in engagement with life's challenges. Courage, for Socrates, wasn't about acting without fear. It was about acting in spite of fear, and in doing so, teaching others to do the same. It's one thing to speak of courage in theory, but it's another to show it in practice. Just as Socrates modeled courage before his students, we too model it daily in the way we move through the world. The idea of modeling courage isn't about perfection, but authenticity. We don't need to hide our fears or pretend we have all the answers. In fact, showing how we handle fear, uncertainty, and hardship is perhaps one of the most valuable lessons we can impart. It's a recognition, as the philosopher Aristotle proposed, that virtue lies not in avoiding difficulties, but in confronting them with purpose. Courage, then, becomes less about overcoming fear entirely and more about moving forward in the face of it. When we embrace our vulnerability, we teach others that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the strength to keep moving even when we are afraid. Like all virtues, courage isn't a one-time achievement, it's a practice, a choice we make every day. Some days it's loud and visible, other days it's quiet and internal, but always it is essential. When we begin to view courage not as heroism, but as presence, being here, being real, being true to ourselves and others, then we start to recognize its place in every moment. To practice courage is to speak kindly when it would be easier to lash out. To admit you are wrong when your ego wants to deflect. To try again after a failure, even if you're tired of trying. To rest, not out of laziness, but because you need to protect your long-term well-being. These acts, too, are courageous. Courage doesn't promise safety or success. It doesn't guarantee that things will get easier. But it does offer something better, a life lived in alignment with your deepest values. And in that alignment, even in the midst of chaos, there is a kind of peace. So what does it mean to face chaos with strength and resilience? It means accepting that the world will not always make sense, that people will let you down, that outcomes are unpredictable, that suffering is inevitable, and then choosing, in the face of all that, to live well anyway. That is courage. It means saying yes to life, not because it's easy or fair or guaranteed to be meaningful, but because it's yours. And because in saying yes, you open the door to connection, to creativity, to love. To live courageously is to participate fully in existence, even when you don't know where it's leading, especially when you don't. Camus once said, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer." That, to me, is the heart of courage. Not the absence of struggle, but the enduring presence of light, however faint, that refuses to go out. Courage isn't loud, it's not glamorous. It's the quiet commitment to keep going, to love, to speak, to hope, even when it would be easier not to. And in that, it is among the most noble expressions of being human. 5 things to consider. Courage as a practice, not a trait. Courage is not a fixed characteristic, but a quality that we can cultivate through practice. Just like physical exercise strengthens the body, regular acts of courage build mental and emotional resilience, allowing us to face life's challenges with greater strength. Courage is contagious. Our actions speak louder than words. By modeling courage in the face of difficulty, we set an example for others, especially those who look to us for guidance. Whether we realize it or not, others, especially children and younger individuals, are learning how to respond to adversity by observing our reactions. Facing fear, not eliminating it. Courage is not about eliminating fear, but about moving forward in spite of it. The fear of failure, uncertainty, and discomfort is universal, but how we respond to these fears shapes our character. Courage is about acting despite our fears, not in their absence. The role of vulnerability in courage. True courage involves embracing vulnerability. Acknowledging our fears and uncertainties and continuing to act with integrity and resolve is one of the most powerful ways to demonstrate courage. It's about showing that it's okay to be afraid, but still choosing to act. Courage as a tool for growth and change. Just as physical exercise strengthens the body, cultivating courage enables personal growth and transformation. Through courageous actions, we expand our boundaries, develop new perspectives, and gain the strength to face future challenges with confidence. Reflection questions. How do I currently respond to fear or discomfort in my life? Reflect on recent moments when you faced fear or uncertainty. How did you react? Did you choose to act in spite of your fear, or did you avoid the challenge altogether? What is one area of my life where I could practice more courage? Think about a situation where you're currently hesitating or feeling stuck. What would it look like if you approached that situation with courage, and what steps can you take to do so? How do I model courage for others, especially those who look up to me? Consider the ways in which you influence those around you through your actions. Are you setting an example of courageous living, particularly in difficult circumstances? How can you model courage more effectively? What role does vulnerability play in my understanding of courage? Reflect on how being open about your fears or challenges might make you more courageous. How can vulnerability enhance your ability to act with integrity in tough situations? In what ways has my concept of courage changed over time? Look back at how you used to define courage compared to how you understand it now. Has your definition evolved from a simple idea of bravery to something more nuanced, like resilience or endurance in the face of hardship? Chapter 6. Justice, living ethically in an unfair world. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Marcus Aurelius. There is something profoundly unsettling about the idea that the universe is indifferent to human suffering. We grow up hearing stories that celebrate fairness, morality, and balance, as though life has an inherent sense of justice. But as we get older, as we witness tragedy, inequality, and arbitrary misfortune, we begin to understand that fairness is not a law of the universe. It is a human invention. And yet it matters. Justice matters precisely because the universe does not guarantee it. If everything were always fair, there would be no need for human intervention. But because the world is not inherently just, we must choose to be just. It is an act of rebellion, an act of meaning-making, to live ethically in a world that often does not reward goodness or punish cruelty. This rebellion is deeply personal for me. I have felt the sting of injustice and witnessed it in the lives of people I care about. At times, I have been tempted to adopt the indifferent posture of the universe, to retreat into cynicism or self-preservation. But justice calls us to resist that temptation. It asks us to remain awake, aware, and engaged. It's easier to look away, easier to say, "That's not my problem," or "There's nothing I can do." But every time I've chosen to stay engaged, to speak up, to intervene, to bear witness, I've felt a quiet strength grow in me. Not the kind of strength that conquers, but the kind that endures. It's the strength of someone who refuses to abandon their conscience, even when the world seems determined to wear it down. Justice is not always loud. It's not always about protests or courtrooms or sweeping reforms. Sometimes it's found in a quiet refusal. A refusal to lie to protect yourself. A refusal to join in cruel laughter. A refusal to take advantage just because you can. These are small acts, but they matter. They accumulate. They become the moral fabric of our lives. As Viktor Frankl wrote, everything can be taken from a man but one thing. The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Justice, I've found, often begins with that choice. And so, even when I'm tired, even when I'm disillusioned, I return to that choice. Not because I believe my actions will fix the world, but because they are what keep me human in a world that often forgets how to be. This, to me, is the quiet rebellion of justice, not seeking to impose order on the chaos of the cosmos, but refusing to let that chaos shape me into someone unrecognizable. Albert Camus once wrote, "The world is not what it seems, and it remains desperately indifferent." But that is precisely why we must live with our eyes open. Justice is not a natural outcome. It is a choice we make despite the odds. And to me, that choice is one of the highest expressions of human dignity. We all know the feeling of being wronged, of seeing good people suffer while others prosper through deception or greed. It can be infuriating, and that rage, if left unchecked, can curdle into apathy. It's easy to say, "Why bother?" when the world doesn't play by the rules we were taught. But I've come to see that justice isn't about ensuring we always get what we deserve. It's about being the kind of person who chooses fairness, not because it's guaranteed to work out, but because it's right. Choosing to act justly in an unjust world is a form of existential defiance. It's a way of reclaiming agency when everything around you suggests that only power and manipulation prevail. There's something deeply grounding about that choice. When I act with fairness, even when no one sees it, even when it costs me something, I feel rooted in something solid. That sense of inner alignment may not erase the injustice in the world, but it keeps me from becoming part of it. The philosopher Immanuel Kant once said, "Act only according to that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law." I return to that idea often, not as a rigid rule, but as a guide. Would I want everyone to act as I'm about to act? Would I respect a world that ran on the principles I'm living by today? Justice, in this sense, becomes less about correcting others and more about correcting myself. It becomes a mirror rather than a measuring stick. And this mindset has saved me from bitterness. When the unfairness of life begins to gnaw at me, I remind myself, I'm not here to enforce cosmic fairness. I'm here to live with integrity in the face of absurdity. That doesn't mean turning away from injustice, but it does mean I don't need to control outcomes to justify my efforts. Justice, when internalized, becomes less about setting the world straight and more about refusing to let the world bend me out of shape. Living ethically in an unfair world is a form of spiritual resistance. It is choosing to be kind even when cruelty is fashionable. It is choosing honesty when lies are profitable. It is choosing to help others when doing so may never be reciprocated. And these choices over time define who we are. Justice begins with personal responsibility. I used to think justice was mainly about laws, institutions, and systems. And it is, in part. But those systems are made of people. If I cannot live justly in my own life, if I cannot keep my word, treat others with respect, or stand up for the vulnerable, then how can I expect society to be just? Justice is built from the inside out. This doesn't mean ignoring larger structural issues. Quite the opposite. It means that justice requires both a personal and collective commitment. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Living ethically means aligning our actions with our ideals, even when the world gives us every reason not to. But what does it mean to be just when justice itself seems so often out of reach? I've struggled with this. There are days when I look around and feel overwhelmed by the sheer scale of injustice. Poverty, racism, corruption, war. My individual choices can feel laughably small against all of that. But I've come to understand that acting justly doesn't require that we solve every problem. It requires that we do not become indifferent. There's a line from Marcus Aurelius that I often return to. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. That single sentence cuts through a great deal of philosophical fog. Justice, for all its complexity, begins in action. It lives in the way we speak to the people we disagree with. It lives in the way we pay attention to those whose voices are ignored. It lives in the decisions we make when no one is watching. There's also a strange kind of freedom that comes with accepting that the world is not fair. We stop expecting moral order from the external world and start creating it within ourselves. This doesn't mean giving up on the world. It means we no longer rely on it to give us a reason to be good. We are good because we have chosen to be. Because to do otherwise would be to betray something essential within ourselves. And here's the paradox. When we accept the absurdity of life, the fact that it offers no guarantees, we become more capable of justice, not less. We stop bargaining with the universe. We stop saying, if I'm good, I'll be rewarded. Instead, we say, I will be just, even if there is no reward. That is a deeper form of strength. It's what Camus meant when he spoke of the rebel who says no to injustice, and in doing so, affirms something vital about humanity. This kind of justice is not transactional. It's existential. It stems from a commitment to value and dignity, even in a world that does not reciprocate. Camus writes in The Rebel, what is a rebel? A man who says no, but whose refusal does not imply a renunciation. To act justly in the face of absurdity is not to give up. It is to assert that our actions still matter, even if the cosmos is silent. It's a kind of meaning we build ourselves, not imposed from above, but carved out of choice and conscience. That kind of justice is humble. It doesn't come from moral superiority or self-righteousness, but from a shared vulnerability. We know what it's like to be hurt, to be overlooked, to be betrayed, and so we try not to pass that pain forward. We try to do better, not because we believe we'll be praised for it, but because we know how much harm is done when people stop trying. Justice becomes a form of empathy in action, a refusal to become numb or cynical. And most importantly, this kind of justice is sustainable. Because it's not based on outcomes, it doesn't wither when things don't go our way. It becomes a way of moving through the world with consistency and compassion. In that sense, justice in an absurd world is not a contradiction. It's a declaration, a quiet, persistent reminder that even in the absence of cosmic fairness, we can still choose to be fair. We can still be the kind of people we hope the world will one day reflect. Of course, there are limits. I've wrestled with how to define the boundary between personal responsibility and systemic injustice. Where does my obligation end? What is my role in a world that's shaped by forces I did not choose? These are not easy questions, and I don't have all the answers. But I've come to believe that we are responsible for our response. We may not have created the systems we live in, but we can choose how we participate in them, or how we resist them. For example, I think about how I spend my money, where I invest my time, how I use my voice. These are not always dramatic acts. Sometimes justice looks like buying from a local farmer instead of a multinational chain. Sometimes it looks like standing up for a colleague. Sometimes it's just listening, truly listening, to someone whose life experience is radically different from my own. Justice also means being accountable for the harm we cause, even unintentionally. I've had to confront the fact that at times I've benefited from systems that disadvantage others. That's a hard truth. But part of living ethically is not running from that discomfort. It's letting it sharpen our awareness and guide our actions. Justice doesn't require guilt, it requires responsibility. The challenge is to live in this tension, to recognize our smallness without letting it excuse inaction. To act ethically, even when the outcome is uncertain. To be just, not because it's easy, but because it is necessary for the kind of world we want to live in, even if that world remains imperfect. Justice, in this sense, is not about reaching some final state of perfection. It's about cultivating a posture of integrity in the midst of complexity. It's about asking the hard questions, acknowledging what we don't know, and doing the best we can anyway. 5 things to consider. Justice is not contingent on fairness from the universe. The universe does not promise justice or fairness, and yet we can choose to act justly. Justice becomes meaningful not because it is rewarded, but because it is freely chosen in the face of indifference. It is a virtue born not of comfort, but of resolve. Acting justly is a form of rebellion against chaos and apathy. In an absurd world where cruelty often goes unchecked and corruption is rewarded, choosing to be fair, honest, and compassionate is a profound act of resistance. As Camus suggested, the rebel who says no to injustice affirms dignity, not only for themselves, but for others. Justice begins at the personal level. Before we can advocate for societal change, we must examine our own lives. Do we treat others fairly when no one is watching? Do we speak up when someone is mistreated? Do we live with integrity even when there's nothing to gain? Justice requires empathy, not just principle. It's not enough to be right. Justice must be rooted in a recognition of our shared humanity. When we act justly, we are saying, your pain matters, your dignity matters. Even if the world looks away, I won't. That kind of justice is deeply relational. Justice does not always bring immediate results, but it brings personal coherence. You may not always see justice win in the short term, but when you live justly, your life aligns with your values. That alignment creates inner strength, clarity, and peace. Justice becomes its own reward, not in outcome, but in who it helps you become. Reflection questions. When have I witnessed or experienced injustice, and how did I respond? Did I speak up, stay silent, take action, or look away? What motivated my choice, and what would I do differently now? Do I act justly even when there is nothing to gain, and possibly something to lose? What values guide my decisions when there's no reward involved? What does that say about the kind of person I am becoming? How do I define fairness, and how do I handle situations when life doesn't feel fair? Do I become resentful, indifferent, or cynical? Or do I remain committed to justice regardless of the outcome? In what areas of my life am I tempted to compromise on justice for the sake of convenience or self-interest? Are there relationships, workplaces, or systems where I tolerate or participate in injustice? Why? What does it mean to live ethically in an indifferent world? And what small acts of justice can I commit to today? How can I use my voice, my time, or my presence to support fairness and dignity in my community, even in quiet or unseen ways? Chapter 7. Self-discipline, finding stability in a chaotic life. No man is free who is not master of himself. Epictetus. For much of my life, I misunderstood self-discipline. I thought it was about rigidity, about depriving myself of pleasure or pushing myself relentlessly toward productivity. I imagined discipline as a cold, joyless force, something associated with punishment or restriction. But I've come to understand it differently. Self-discipline, at its core, isn't about denying life. It's about shaping it. In a world that often feels chaotic and unmoored, discipline provides the structure that allows freedom to flourish. Discipline, for me, has become the architecture of integrity. It's how I align my actions with my values, even when circumstances are unpredictable. Without it, I'm at the mercy of impulse, of whatever craving or mood happens to show up in the moment. But when I cultivate self-discipline, I give myself the power to choose. I create space between stimulus and response, and in that space, I discover agency. This is not to say discipline is easy. It's one of the most difficult and misunderstood virtues. In a culture that often glorifies spontaneity and comfort, the disciplined path can feel lonely. We're told to follow our passion, listen to our hearts, treat ourselves. There's truth in that, but it's only part of the picture. Real freedom doesn't come from indulging every desire. It comes from mastering those desires so they don't master us. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom, in this sense, isn't the absence of constraints. It's the ability to choose the right constraints. When I limit my distractions, I gain focus. When I say no to harmful temptations, I say yes to long-term peace. When I commit to daily practice, even when I don't feel like it, I build resilience. This isn't oppression, it's liberation from chaos. We often think of freedom as doing whatever we want, whenever we want. But that kind of freedom can quickly lead to enslavement, to our impulses, our addictions, our worst habits. True freedom is the capacity to act in alignment with our highest values, not just our fleeting desires. Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of a concentration camp, famously said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. That space is where discipline lives, and within that space lies our truest freedom." The paradox is that discipline gives us more options, not fewer. A disciplined writer has the freedom to produce work consistently. A disciplined musician can improvise with ease because they've trained the fundamentals. A disciplined thinker can change their mind without losing their grounding because they've trained themselves to question and reflect. Discipline doesn't narrow our lives, it strengthens the foundation upon which a larger life can be built. And perhaps most importantly, discipline creates integrity. When my actions are consistent with my values, I feel whole. There's less internal friction, less cognitive dissonance. I'm no longer torn between what I want and what I do. That alignment brings a quiet confidence, a peace that doesn't come from comfort or control, but from the knowledge that I can trust myself, even when the world feels untrustworthy. That's the kind of strength I want to live by. Over the years, I've come to see self-discipline as a quiet kind of courage. It's not glamorous, it doesn't often get applause. But it is the virtue that enables every other virtue to take root. Wisdom without discipline is just theory. Justice without discipline falters under pressure. Courage without discipline burns out. If we want to live a principled life, not just think about one, we need the steady flame of discipline to guide us through the dark. One of the first things I had to accept in developing discipline was this: motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes like the weather. If I waited to feel motivated before taking action, I'd get very little done. Discipline is what remains when motivation disappears. It's the decision to keep going because I've committed to something, not because I feel like it in the moment. And that shift, from motivation to commitment, has changed everything for me. There are mornings when I wake up tired, discouraged, or distracted. There are days when the chaos of life presses in and nothing seems worth the effort. But discipline doesn't ask how I feel. It simply asks, what did I decide matters to me? And am I willing to act in alignment with that decision? Over time, discipline has become a form of love, a way of honoring my own values, my future self, and the people who depend on me. Self-discipline also requires humility. It forces us to confront our limits, our tendencies toward avoidance, procrastination, addiction, or self-sabotage. That confrontation can be uncomfortable, even painful, but it's honest. And in that honesty, there's the potential for transformation. As Aristotle noted, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Discipline is what turns ideals into reality, bit by bit, day after day. Of course, discipline isn't about perfection. I've failed many times. I've broken commitments, made excuses, fallen into bad habits. But the point isn't to never fall. The point is to get up with intention, to return again to the path I've chosen. Discipline, like virtue itself, is a process of becoming, not a static achievement. Each time I return to my values, I reinforce them. Each time I begin again, I deepen my strength. There's also an unexpected joy that comes with discipline. It's not the flashy, euphoric kind of joy that comes with indulgence. It's quieter, more like contentment. It's the deep satisfaction of following through, of building something steady in a world full of distraction. When I keep my promises to myself, I feel grounded. I can trust myself. And that self-trust becomes a kind of internal compass, guiding me through uncertainty. We live in a time when many external systems are unreliable. Institutions break down, economies fluctuate, algorithms manipulate our attention. In this climate, personal discipline becomes not just a virtue, but a form of sovereignty. It's how we reclaim agency. It's how we stop being passive consumers of experience and start becoming active authors of our lives. As Viktor Frankl wrote, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. But here's something I didn't expect to learn. Self-discipline is not about self-denial. It's not about living a joyless, rigid life devoid of spontaneity. Instead, it's about choosing what matters most, again and again, even when distractions and temptations beckon. It's about saying yes to the kind of life I want to build, even when that means saying no to something easier or more immediately gratifying. In fact, the deeper I've gone into self-discipline, the more I've realized it's rooted in care, not control. It's an act of loyalty to myself, to my values, to the future I believe in. It's about treating my time, attention, and energy as sacred resources, not to hoard them, but to spend them wisely. This doesn't mean I never rest or indulge or wander off course. It means I know the difference between rest and escape, between joy and numbing, between freedom and avoidance. The most disciplined people I know are also the most alive. They laugh fully, love deeply, and create with intention, not because they've cut themselves off from pleasure, but because they've cultivated a life where pleasure arises from depth, not distraction. When I practice self-discipline, I don't feel like I'm missing out. I feel like I'm fully engaged with the path I've chosen and not just being pulled around by the noise of the world. As Aristotle said, what lies in our power to do lies in our power not to do. That power, the ability to choose with clarity, feels less like punishment and more like liberation every time I return to it. The more I live this way, the more I see that self-discipline is not the enemy of joy. It's what makes joy sustainable. There's a kind of freedom that only discipline provides. It may sound paradoxical, but the more I train myself to live with intention, the more expansive my life becomes. I have more time because I waste less of it. I have more peace because I'm not constantly wrestling with guilt or regret. I have more energy because I'm not being pulled in 1,000 directions by impulse. In learning to govern myself, I've become more free, not less. This insight has been echoed by countless thinkers throughout history. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, put it bluntly, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom in this view is not the absence of responsibility, but the ability to choose our responses. Self-discipline allows us to pause, reflect, and decide, rather than react blindly to the chaos around us. It enables us to create lives rooted in meaning, not just motion. I've also come to see that self-discipline isn't something you can impose on someone else. You can teach tools, offer guidance, and create supportive environments. But real discipline has to be chosen. It has to come from within. And in my own life, that shift came when I stopped trying to impress others and started asking myself what kind of person I truly wanted to be. The answer to that question became my compass. There's a spiritual element to this too. When I practice discipline, I feel more connected, not just to myself, but to something deeper. Call it purpose, call it virtue, call it soul. It's that part of me that wants to live a life that matters. A life that's not just about reacting to external events, but about responding with integrity. And every small act of discipline, getting up early, finishing a project, resisting a harmful urge, is a way of honoring that connection. Of course, cultivating discipline isn't easy. We live in a culture that profits from our distractions. We're bombarded by messages telling us to indulge, to scroll, to spend. Practicing discipline in this context can feel like swimming upstream. But that resistance, that friction, is what builds strength. It's what sharpens our awareness and tests our resolve. And in the process, it reveals to us what we're truly capable of. It's important, though, to cultivate discipline with compassion. I've seen how easy it is to turn self-discipline into self-punishment, to hold ourselves to impossible standards and then collapse under the weight of our own expectations. True discipline is firm but kind. It invites us to grow without shaming us for our missteps. It's not about becoming flawless. It's about becoming faithful to our values, even when it's hard. This kind of compassionate discipline is especially important during times of uncertainty. When life is chaotic, our routines are disrupted, and everything feels out of control, it's easy to fall into despair or disarray. But those are the times when discipline matters most. Even simple acts, waking at a consistent time, preparing a healthy meal, taking a walk, can serve as grounding rituals. They remind us that we are still capable of choice, still capable of care. The key I've found is to start small. Self-discipline doesn't require a dramatic overhaul of your life. It begins with one action, repeated consistently, one area of focus, one commitment to honor, and from that small start, something powerful can grow. As Lao Tzu said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Discipline is that step, taken again and again, until it becomes a path. And over time, that path leads to a kind of quiet confidence, a knowing that you can rely on yourself, that you can endure discomfort without abandoning your values, that you can build something meaningful, even in the midst of instability. In this way, discipline becomes more than a habit. It becomes a way of being, a way of standing firm when the ground beneath you shifts. 5 things to consider. Self-discipline is not punishment, it's alignment. True discipline isn't about depriving yourself. It's about aligning your actions with your deeper values, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. Freedom and discipline are not opposites. The more you master your impulses, the freer you become to act intentionally rather than reactively. As Epictetus said, mastery of self is the foundation of freedom. Consistency matters more than intensity. Grand gestures and bursts of motivation can't replace the quiet, repeated choices that form character. A small act repeated daily has more transformative power than a dramatic but short-lived change. Discipline is an act of care for your future self. Every disciplined choice is a gift you give to the person you're becoming. It's how you earn your own trust and build a life that reflects your intentions. It's okay to fail. What matters is returning. Self-discipline isn't perfection. It's the practice of returning to your path again and again, even after missteps, with humility and renewed commitment. Reflection questions. In what areas of your life do you feel most out of alignment with your values, and how might self-discipline help restore that alignment? When you think about your habits, which ones are serving your long-term well-being, and which ones are rooted in immediate gratification? How do you typically respond to setbacks or failures in your discipline, and what would it look like to respond with compassion and recommitment instead of shame? What daily or weekly practice could you implement to build consistency, even in the midst of uncertainty or stress? How does your understanding of freedom shift when you consider it as the ability to master yourself rather than avoid responsibility? Chapter 8. The daily practice of virtue. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Viktor Frankl. When we speak of living a virtuous life, it's easy to imagine grand gestures, acts of moral heroism, or dramatic sacrifices that signal our commitment to higher ideals. But the truth is, virtue lives in the mundane. It takes shape not in rare, extraordinary moments, but in the small, consistent actions we choose every day. This is where virtue becomes real, in the quiet discipline of choosing to live well, moment by moment. I've come to see the practice of virtue as a kind of rhythm. Like a musician returning to scales or an athlete to warm-ups, I return to my values daily, not because it's glamorous, but because it's necessary. Wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline are not traits we acquire once and possess forever. They are practices we cultivate, and like anything worth building, they require effort, repetition, and patience. In my own life, this means paying attention to how I start and end my day. Do I begin with intention or distraction? Do I reflect on my actions or rush blindly into the next task? The questions seem simple, but they guide me back to what matters. Each morning, I try to ask myself, what kind of person do I want to be today? And each night, did I live according to my values? These bookends of awareness help anchor me, especially when life becomes overwhelming. Mindfulness is an essential part of this process. By paying close attention to the present moment, without judgment, I create space to respond rather than react. When I feel anger rising, mindfulness gives me a chance to pause. When fear or anxiety cloud my thoughts, mindfulness grounds me in my breath, in my body, in reality. This small gap between stimulus and response is where virtue lives. As Viktor Frankl wrote, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. But mindfulness alone isn't enough. It needs a direction, a set of values to guide it. That's where reflection comes in. Journaling has become a powerful tool for me, not just as a record of my thoughts, but as a mirror. It helps me recognize patterns, track progress, and confront the places where I fall short. Some days I write a single sentence. Other days, pages pour out. The length doesn't matter. What matters is the commitment to honesty. There are days when I don't want to reflect. Days when I'd rather distract myself with noise or numb myself with routine. But those are often the days when reflection matters most. Avoidance never makes discomfort disappear, it just buries it deeper. Facing myself honestly, even when the truth is unpleasant, is one of the most difficult disciplines I've learned. But it's also one of the most transformative. Over time, journaling has taught me not only to track my thoughts, but to question them. Was I acting out of fear or courage today? Did I listen with empathy or merely wait to speak? Did I avoid discomfort, or did I lean into the hard conversation, the honest feedback, the vulnerable truth? These questions aren't meant to induce guilt. They're meant to invite growth. When approached with compassion, self-inquiry becomes a path to clarity rather than shame. One of the most important lessons I've learned is that failure is inevitable. There are days I fall short of my ideals. Days when I act impulsively, speak harshly, withdraw, or procrastinate. The old me used to spiral into guilt on those days, mistaking imperfection for hypocrisy. But I've come to understand that failure is not the opposite of virtue. It's part of the practice. The real test of virtue isn't whether you fail, it's how you respond to failure. Can you get back up? Can you forgive yourself, reflect, and return to your path without despair? That's what virtue demands, not a flawless record, but a resilient spirit. Stoicism has helped me here. The Stoics never claimed to be perfect, they aimed to progress. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. But I have seen the beauty of good, and I have seen the ugliness of evil." His wisdom reminds me that preparation and self-reminding are part of the daily work. Another tool I use in my daily practice is the evening review, an ancient Stoic technique. Before bed, I ask myself 3 simple questions. What did I do well today? What did I do poorly? What can I improve tomorrow? This practice helps me stay grounded and focused. It reminds me that virtue is not some distant ideal, but a daily effort. Progress is made not in leaps, but in steps, and sometimes those steps are small. There's something humbling and hopeful about that. It means that no matter how chaotic the world becomes, I can return to my center. I can choose how I show up today. I may not control outcomes, but I can control my character. In a way, that is the most empowering realization of all. Wisdom in daily life often looks like pausing before reacting. It's the choice to listen fully before responding, to ask questions instead of jumping to conclusions, and to admit when you're wrong. Wisdom is found in the quiet decision to seek understanding rather than validation. It doesn't always come with grand revelations. Sometimes it's as small as choosing not to escalate an argument, or as simple as turning off the noise of social media to sit quietly with your own thoughts. For me, a small but significant act of wisdom is writing down one thing I misunderstood during the day. It could be a conversation I misread or an assumption I made too quickly. This practice reminds me that seeing clearly isn't automatic. It's a habit that must be cultivated. In doing this regularly, I begin to hold my perspectives more lightly, knowing they're often incomplete. And that humility opens the door to greater clarity. Courage, too, is often quiet. We tend to associate it with heroic acts or dramatic stands, but real courage is often invisible to others. It's making that phone call you've been avoiding. It's speaking up in a meeting when silence would be easier. It's choosing to stay when leaving would be more comfortable. Or leaving when staying is a betrayal of yourself. One of the most courageous things I do is admit when I'm afraid and take the next step anyway. There's a kind of courage in simply showing up, again and again, in a world that doesn't guarantee reward. As Camus put it, the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. To me, that means courage is found in the very act of continuing. Not because you expect to win, but because you've decided that the struggle is meaningful. That small daily act of showing up is one of the clearest expressions of a virtuous life. Justice may feel like the most external of the virtues, but it begins with how we treat the people closest to us. It shows up in how we listen, how we share space, how we acknowledge the humanity in others, even when it's inconvenient. In a world that often rewards self-interest, justice is the decision to be fair, even when it doesn't benefit us directly. There are days I ask myself, did I interrupt someone who needed to be heard? Did I give credit where it was due? Did I speak up against something that felt wrong, even if it was uncomfortable? These small actions matter. Justice is built in the micro moments of our lives, not only in the headlines. And when we neglect these moments, we participate, however passively, in injustice. That realization compels me to stay awake and aware. And then there is self-discipline, the often uncelebrated work of doing what must be done when it's least appealing. Waking up early to write, even when I'm tired. Saying no to distractions that pull me away from my purpose. Choosing the nourishing meal over the convenient one. Reaching out for connection rather than disappearing into isolation. Self-discipline isn't glamorous. No one applauds the act of turning off Netflix to go to bed on time. But these small, repeated choices accumulate into something powerful. They form the foundation of a life lived with intention. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." I've found that to be deeply true. If I don't direct my actions with purpose, the world will happily do it for me, through algorithms, appetites, or the inertia of comfort. What ties all of this together is mindfulness, not as a trendy concept, but as a daily orientation toward awareness. When I'm mindful, I can notice the fork in the road. Do I scroll or reflect? Do I judge or understand? Do I act from habit or from principle? Without mindfulness, virtue becomes abstract. With mindfulness, it becomes alive. This doesn't mean I'm always calm or enlightened. Mindfulness isn't a state I achieve, it's a muscle I train. On good days, I remember to breathe before reacting. On hard days, I realize after the fact that I didn't. But even that realization is part of the practice. Awareness, even when delayed, is a step toward wisdom. I've also come to rely on rituals, not rigid routines, but rhythms that support a virtuous life. Morning reflection, evening journaling, a midday walk in silence, weekly conversations with people I trust. These aren't rules, they're reminders, anchors. They bring me back to what matters when the noise of the world gets too loud. In this way, the daily practice of virtue is not a burden, it's a lifeline. It gives shape to days that might otherwise blur together. It creates meaning in the ordinary. It allows me to say, with sincerity, that I am living in alignment with my values, even when no one is watching. Over time, this practice transforms your sense of identity. You stop thinking of virtue as something you try to do and start seeing it as something you are becoming. Not perfectly, not without setbacks, but steadily, intentionally, and with increasing clarity. That, to me, is the heart of it all. Not grand gestures or flawless consistency, but the quiet courage to begin again. The willingness to fall short, reflect, and return. The humility to see clearly, the discipline to act with integrity, the compassion to care, and the strength to keep going. The daily practice of virtue isn't just a method, it's a philosophy in motion. It's how we live with meaning in a world that doesn't hand it to us. It's how we build a foundation in the midst of uncertainty. And it's how we remember, day after day, who we are choosing to become. One of the most profound realizations I've had is that virtue doesn't require ideal conditions. You don't have to be on retreat, in a perfect mental state, or surrounded by supportive people to practice it. In fact, some of the clearest opportunities to embody virtue arise when everything feels off, when you're tired, stressed, or provoked. These are the testing grounds, the crucibles in which virtue is forged. It's easy to be kind when you're well rested and appreciated. It's harder and more meaningful to choose kindness when you're irritated or overlooked. It's easy to be courageous when you feel strong. It's harder to act with courage when you're anxious and uncertain. But these are the moments that matter most because they're real. They are the raw material of daily life. They are where character is truly formed. I've learned not to wait for the ideal time to practice virtue. Instead, I've learned to meet life as it is. If I'm rushed, I try to be just a little more patient. If I feel discouraged, I aim to take one courageous step anyway. If I fall short, and I often do, I remind myself that the next moment is another opportunity. And the next. And the next. This is not about being perfect, it's about being persistent. This persistence is sustained by reflective practices, especially journaling. For me, writing is not just a way to record what happened. It's a way to understand myself. It's how I sort through the chaos of the day, extract meaning from it, and chart a path forward. A simple prompt like, "What challenged me today and how did I respond?" can open up deep insight. I'm not looking to punish myself for mistakes, I'm looking to learn. Sometimes I write about small victories, a moment when I paused instead of reacting, or a conversation in which I stayed present. Other times I write about failures, when I was harsh or selfish, or when I abandoned my values for the sake of convenience. But the act of writing grounds me, it keeps me honest. It reminds me that the goal is not performance, but growth. I also use self-inquiry as a tool for alignment. I'll ask questions like, is this action rooted in fear or in integrity? Or what would the virtuous version of myself do here? These are not abstract questions. They are deeply practical. They help me move from reactivity to intentionality. They turn vague ideals into daily decisions. There's power in asking these questions, even when I don't have clear answers. They orient me toward the kind of life I want to live. They pull me back from the brink of autopilot and remind me that each moment carries moral weight, not in a heavy, burdensome way, but in a way that affirms my agency. I get to choose who I am becoming. And yes, I fail often. I fall into patterns of avoidance, laziness, distraction. But I no longer see failure as evidence that I'm not virtuous. I see it as part of the process. The Stoics didn't promise perfection, they promised progress. Seneca said, "While we teach, we learn." I would add, "While we stumble, we grow." Each failure is a teacher if I'm willing to listen. The danger, of course, is falling into despair, believing that setbacks define us, or that our efforts are meaningless because the world is indifferent. But I've come to believe that despair is often a misinterpretation of effort. It's the voice of fatigue, not failure. When I feel it creeping in, I try to return to simplicity. A breath, a walk, a kind word, a quiet act of courage. These small gestures rebuild my footing. I think of virtue now as a kind of daily rhythm, like the tide. Some days I rise with clarity and intention. Other days I recede into confusion or distraction. But I always return. That return is the real practice. That's where meaning is made. Living a virtuous life doesn't mean you're always noble, serene, or wise. It means you're committed to showing up as your best self, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's hard. And that commitment over time becomes something solid, something trustworthy, something that can withstand the storms of life. So I end each day with a kind of inventory, not a judgment, but a reflection. Where did I align with my values? Where did I drift? What can I try differently tomorrow? This practice doesn't just make me more virtuous, it makes me more human, more connected, more awake, more alive. In the end, the daily practice of virtue is not about becoming exceptional. It's about becoming real. It's about facing life with open eyes and an open heart. It's about striving to live with integrity, not because anyone is watching, but because this is your one wild, absurd, precious life, and you've chosen to meet it with courage, clarity, fairness, and strength. 5 things to consider. Virtue is built through small, consistent actions. Great moral character is not forged in grand, dramatic moments, but in daily habits, choosing patience over irritation, courage over avoidance, and integrity over convenience. The mundane moments matter more than we often realize. Mindfulness grounds virtue in the present moment. Practicing mindfulness, being aware of your emotions, impulses, and environment, creates space between reaction and response. That space is where virtue lives. You can only act justly, wisely, and courageously when you are truly present. Failure is part of the process, not a disqualifier. Virtue is not about perfection. Everyone slips. What matters is your willingness to reflect, learn, and return to your values. Progress, not flawlessness, is the aim. Reflection practices deepen self-awareness. Journaling, self-inquiry, and evening reviews help us track our alignment with virtue. These practices turn experience into insight and prevent us from living on autopilot. They make invisible patterns visible. Living virtuously is an act of rebellion against apathy. In a chaotic, indifferent world, choosing to live with integrity is a radical act. You don't control the outcomes, but you control your character. That is a source of meaning and stability no external force can take from you. Reflection. Questions. In what small ways did I practice wisdom, courage, justice, or self-discipline today? Reflecting on daily actions can help you notice where you're living in alignment with your values and where you might want to adjust. When I faced a setback or failure recently, how did I respond? Did I react with integrity or with frustration and blame? Consider how your virtues hold up under pressure and what that reveals about your inner foundation. What habits or distractions are pulling me away from the kind of person I want to become? Identifying what derails your efforts helps you take responsibility and recenter your focus. How does mindfulness, or the lack of it, shape the way I make choices throughout the day? Explore how presence and awareness, or autopilot and reactivity, influence your decisions and behavior. What can I learn from reflecting on my day? What pattern do I notice in how I act when no one is watching? Virtue is about internal consistency. This question helps you examine the difference between image and integrity. Chapter 9. Virtue in Relationships and Society. Man is by nature a social animal. An individual who is unsocial naturally and not accidentally is either beneath our notice or more than human. Aristotle. Virtue does not thrive in solitude. It reveals itself in the way we relate to others. Alone, it's easy to seem wise, just, or disciplined. But when we engage with others, friends, family, colleagues, even strangers, our real character surfaces. These interactions, especially those laced with friction or misunderstanding, uncover the gaps in our growth and invite us to become better. The real test of virtue begins when emotions rise and challenges surface. In every relationship, humility must lead. Assuming we're always right, even when we feel justified, creates distance. True wisdom teaches us to listen more than we speak, to suspend judgment and strive to understand before offering a response. When tension builds, I've found it grounding to pause and ask, am I reacting from pride or responding with clarity? Am I trying to win the argument, or am I trying to connect? These simple questions often guide me back to center and help de-escalate conflict. Humility also means accepting that we don't always have the full story. The people we engage with each carry their own experiences, pain, and perspectives, most of which we may never fully understand. When we let go of the need to be right, we create space for empathy to grow. A humble mindset invites dialogue rather than debate. It shifts our focus from control to connection, from dominance to discovery. This shift doesn't make us weak, it makes us wise. It helps us see people, not positions. In practice, humility looks like asking questions instead of making assumptions. It's taking a breath before interrupting. It's choosing curiosity over certainty. These actions may seem small, but they change the emotional temperature of the room. Suddenly, people feel heard rather than dismissed. They open up rather than shut down. This openness invites honesty, and honesty builds trust. And trust, more than agreement, is what sustains healthy relationships. Perhaps most importantly, humility allows us to admit when we're wrong, and to do so without defensiveness. It's not always easy to say, "I didn't handle that well," or "I misunderstood you." But those moments, when handled with sincerity, often deepen the connection rather than damage it. They show that we value the relationship more than our pride. In a world that often rewards certainty and ego, choosing humility is a radical yet quietly powerful act of love. It also takes courage to be honest. Real courage isn't about being loud or forceful, it's about being truthful with compassion. Facing uncomfortable truths, voicing what's difficult to say, and choosing honesty over silence builds trust. People don't feel safe because you avoid conflict. They feel safe because they know they can count on your authenticity. Being consistently real means more than being momentarily agreeable. Honest conversations often require us to risk being misunderstood, rejected, or even disliked. That's why so many avoid them. But the alternative, silence, resentment, or pretending, creates a fragile foundation in any relationship. When we withhold truth to keep the peace, we often lose connection anyway. Courageous honesty isn't about saying whatever comes to mind. It's about expressing what's meaningful, even when it's hard. And when delivered with care, even difficult truths can bring people closer instead of driving them apart. The strength of honesty lies in its clarity. When we are honest about our needs, limits, and experiences, we give others a chance to meet us where we truly are, not where we pretend to be. This kind of transparency fosters deeper understanding and mutual respect. It also models emotional maturity. When others see that we can be both truthful and kind, they're more likely to do the same. In that way, courage becomes contagious. It creates a space where real conversations can happen, ones that challenge, heal, and ultimately deepen the bond between people. At its core, honesty is an act of generosity. It says, "I trust you enough to be real with you." That kind of trust builds intimacy far more than surface-level harmony ever could. It shows that we value the relationship enough to risk discomfort for the sake of growth. Over time, this becomes the groundwork for relationships that don't just survive conflict, they're strengthened by it. Justice, though often discussed as an ideal, shows up in the smallest, most human moments. It's in the way I share credit for a team effort, how I offer a sincere apology, or how I give others the benefit of the doubt. Justice means treating people as valuable, not because of what they can offer, but because of who they are. Respecting someone's dignity, especially when it's inconvenient, is one of the clearest expressions of this virtue. But even with humility, courage, and justice, none of it holds without self-discipline. Discipline is the quiet force that helps me pause instead of reacting in anger. It pushes me to follow through on commitments, even when I'd rather withdraw. Without it, good intentions never become consistent actions. It's the glue that keeps every other virtue intact. In relationships, conflict is inevitable. It stirs emotion, shakes assumptions, and reveals the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore. When I feel hurt or betrayed, my instincts scream for retaliation or retreat, but living with virtue calls for something deeper. It asks me to respond with intention, not impulse. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." That line reminds me that character matters more than control. When I'm tempted to defend myself, I try to shift into reflection. What's really bothering me? Could the other person be struggling with something unseen? Am I interpreting their actions through the lens of my own pain? These kinds of questions often soften my stance and bring clarity where there was once confusion. They don't just reduce conflict, they transform it into an opportunity for growth. Justice during conflict requires us to remember the humanity of the other person. Even when we set boundaries, we can do it with respect. Dehumanizing others in the name of being right only perpetuates harm. Epictetus reminds us that it's not things that disturb us, but our interpretations of them. Adjusting my lens often shifts how I show up in hard conversations. This perspective aligns with a key Stoic principle, that we cannot control external events, only our responses to them. The behavior of others may be beyond our influence, but our internal state remains within reach. When we ground ourselves in this truth, we reclaim our agency. Conflict no longer becomes a threat to our peace, but a practice ground for virtue. In moments of tension, choosing calm over chaos isn't weakness. It's strength refined by discipline. It's proof that we're governed not by reaction, but by reason. From an absurdist lens, conflict can also be seen as a reflection of life's inherent contradictions. Albert Camus wrote that in a world devoid of ultimate meaning, our task is to find freedom and integrity within it. Conflict reminds us that people, like the universe, are unpredictable and often illogical. We can resist this truth and suffer, or we can embrace it and respond with compassion. By choosing understanding over control, we acknowledge the absurdity and still commit to human dignity. We become, as Camus described, rebels with purpose. Not to dominate, but to remain true to ourselves in the face of absurdity. Ultimately, conflict is not a detour from virtue. It is the proving ground. It invites us to turn philosophy into practice, to let values shape action in real time. The Stoics knew that the arena of life is where character is forged. Absurdists knew that the lack of guarantees gives our choices weight. In every difficult moment, we stand at a crossroads, to regress into reaction or to rise into awareness. Virtue, lived through conflict, becomes more than theory. It becomes a way of being. Sometimes, conflict reflects our blind spots. The traits we criticize in others may reveal parts of ourselves we haven't faced. Instead of pointing fingers, I try to look inward. What's this reaction showing me about my own unfinished work? This doesn't excuse harm, but it does help me take responsibility for my role in the dynamic. Often the irritation we feel is less about the other person and more about the unresolved tension within ourselves. Maybe their arrogance reminds me of times I've felt insecure. Maybe their neediness stirs guilt about my own emotional boundaries. When I pause and examine the emotional charge behind my reactions, I often find it rooted in old wounds or unmet needs. This reflection doesn't diminish the reality of someone else's behavior, but it gives me clarity and control over my response. The Stoics taught that we are disturbed not by external events, but by our perceptions of them. Applying this in moments of conflict allows me to disentangle the facts from the narrative I've created around them. It reminds me that while I may not be responsible for someone else's behavior, I am responsible for how I choose to respond, and how I interpret what they've said or done. This awareness is freeing. It shifts me from victimhood to agency, from blame to understanding. Absurdism echoes a similar truth, that the human tendency to seek order in a chaotic world often leads to disappointment. When people act unpredictably or hurtfully, it's tempting to demand that they make sense. But in embracing the absurd, I accept that others are not here to fulfill my expectations. Their behavior, like life itself, may never align with my ideals. Recognizing this allows me to stop grasping for control and instead focus on integrity, on showing up with honesty, compassion, and self-awareness, regardless of what others do. The most powerful change we inspire doesn't come through lectures, it comes through example. When others feel seen, not judged, they listen more. If I want people around me to live with more integrity or courage, I have to live it first. Quiet, consistent action always speaks louder than any argument. Influence doesn't require perfection, just sincerity. People are far more moved by what we embody than by what we say. Words, no matter how persuasive, ring hollow if they're not backed by behavior. But when someone witnesses us navigating difficulty with grace, owning our mistakes without deflection, or standing up for what's right without hostility, it plants a seed. They may not change immediately, or ever, but they remember. And sometimes our example gives them permission to explore their own better self. This echoes the Stoic belief that virtue is its own reward. The goal isn't to change others, but to remain true to our principles, regardless of what others choose. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be. Be one." In practicing this, we become a quiet force of transformation, not through coercion, but through presence. Not by demanding change in others, but by becoming the change ourselves. Absurdist thought, too, affirms this kind of living. In a world lacking inherent meaning, our actions are what define us. Camus believed in revolt, not as violent rebellion, but as a persistent, dignified refusal to surrender to apathy. Living with integrity in a flawed world becomes a kind of defiance. It says, even if nothing guarantees this will matter, I choose to live like it does. That courage, the courage to live our values without needing applause or certainty, is what makes our example unforgettable. Owning mistakes is also part of that integrity. Perfection isn't possible, but accountability is. When I hurt someone or fall short, I've learned that an honest apology means more than an excuse. Choosing to repair instead of retreat builds a foundation of trust that no image or ego can replace. Sometimes all we can offer is our presence. When someone is suffering and there's nothing to fix, simply being there matters. Sitting with another in silence without trying to solve or escape their pain is a quiet act of love and a powerful expression of virtue. When we're passionate about justice, it's tempting to preach. But people rarely change when shamed. They change when supported. Creating space for growth means challenging without condemning, inviting rather than imposing. The work of social virtue is delicate, but deeply impactful. It's also easy to become consumed with self-development, forgetting the social side of virtue. But our character isn't just shaped alone, it's tested in the world. That's why I stay engaged. I vote, I speak out when I see injustice, and I try to do what I can, while knowing I can't do it all. Self-discipline helps me avoid burnout and focus on what's within my control. Camus said, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. Living by our values, even in the face of injustice, becomes a kind of resistance. Listening, especially to voices different from mine, is another form of justice. It requires humility to accept that I might not see the full picture. If I care about fairness, I have to be willing to face hard truths, examine my own privilege, and use my voice to amplify others who are too often ignored." True listening means more than simply hearing words. It means suspending judgment, quieting my inner dialogue, and allowing someone else's truth to exist without immediate rebuttal. In a world full of noise and defensiveness, this kind of listening is revolutionary. It challenges the ego, which constantly seeks to defend, justify, or correct. But when I listen deeply, I send a message that says, "You matter. Your experience matters." That alone can begin to heal divides and foster trust. From a Stoic point of view, listening is also a form of practicing justice. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to love the truth and welcome correction, seeing it not as an attack, but as an opportunity to grow. In that spirit, when I encounter perspectives that challenge my worldview, I try not to resist them. Instead, I aim to learn from them. These moments of discomfort, when approached with openness, become catalysts for wisdom. They sharpen my understanding and soften my assumptions. Absurdist philosophy, too, embraces this tension. Camus understood that we live in a world filled with contradiction, where meaning is never fixed and certainty is an illusion. In such a world, listening becomes an act of rebellion against indifference. It says, even if there's no ultimate truth, I will still honor yours. This commitment to empathy, even in uncertainty, is a powerful form of solidarity. It doesn't erase difference, but it embraces it, and in doing so, creates space for shared humanity. Most of this work doesn't happen on a stage. It shows up in daily interactions, the way I speak to a cashier, how I support a colleague under stress, or how I respond to someone I disagree with online. These moments shape my character more than any public stance ever could. There's no finish line in this journey. Some days I live with grace, others with regret. But every moment is a chance to begin again. What I've come to cherish is that virtue isn't about being flawless. It's about being faithful. Faithful to the kind of person I want to be. Faithful to the kind of world I want to help create. Virtue, to me, is no longer a lofty idea. It's a lived reality, one choice, one word, one act at a time. 5 things to consider. Virtue is tested in relationship, not isolation. It's easy to appear virtuous when we're alone, but true character is revealed in how we treat others, especially during conflict, misunderstanding, or emotional strain. Relationships challenge us to practice what we believe. Humility and self-reflection are foundational. Assuming we're always right distances us from others. Instead, asking honest questions about our triggers, assumptions, and contributions creates space for growth and connection. Humility allows us to listen, learn, and lead by example. Courageous honesty builds trust. Real honesty isn't blunt or harsh, it's compassionate and intentional. Choosing to speak truthfully, even when it's uncomfortable, fosters deep trust. It invites authenticity in others and strengthens the emotional safety of a relationship. Justice begins in everyday interactions. Justice is not only a societal concept, it lives in small, daily choices. Respecting others' dignity, giving credit, apologizing sincerely, and setting healthy boundaries all contribute to a just and ethical way of living. Living virtuously inspires more than preaching. Quiet consistency often has greater impact than loud persuasion. By embodying our values, even when it's inconvenient or unseen, we create ripples of change. People follow what we do more than what we say, especially when our actions align with compassion and integrity. Reflection. Questions. When have I found it most difficult to act with virtue in a relationship, and what did that reveal about my character? Reflect on a specific situation where conflict or misunderstanding tested your values. How often do I question my own assumptions, and what have I learned when I've done so? Consider moments when humility led you to personal growth or deeper understanding. Am I honest in a way that invites trust and safety, or do I avoid discomfort by staying silent or being overly blunt? Think about how you balance truthfulness with compassion in your communication. What small, everyday actions do I take that reflect justice and respect for others? Examine how your daily choices contribute to fairness and integrity in your relationships. Do my actions consistently align with the values I claim to hold, even when no one is watching? Assess how you live out your beliefs through your behavior rather than your words. Chapter 10. The virtue of presence, attention as a moral act. Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. Marcus Aurelius. In our age of relentless distraction, presence feels like a lost art, not just a fleeting aesthetic or a mindfulness cliché, but a deliberate ethical stance. To show up fully to a conversation, a task, a moment, is no small thing. It requires effort, clarity, and a kind of reverence. We tend to think of attention as neutral, as if it's merely a byproduct of mental focus. But it's more than that. Attention is a moral act. What we give our attention to defines what we value, and how we give our attention reflects who we are becoming. This chapter isn't about productivity hacks or time management strategies. It's about choosing to live in a way that affirms others and ourselves through the gift of focused awareness. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus told his students, "Pay attention to yourself." But this wasn't about self-absorption. It was a call to observe one's thoughts and actions with integrity, to resist drifting passively through life. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Concentrate every minute like a Roman on doing what's in front of you with precise and genuine seriousness." That is, to be where you are, with your whole mind. In the modern world, such presence is countercultural. Behavioral economics has shown us how scarce our attention really is, how it's bought, sold, manipulated. Attention is now a commodity, not just a virtue. We live in what Herbert Simon once called an attention economy, where every ping, scroll, and headline competes for our limited bandwidth. In this landscape, reclaiming our attention isn't just an act of self-care, it's an act of defiance. We are no longer merely consumers of content, we are the content. Our preferences are tracked, our reactions monetized, and our distraction exploited. As philosopher Byung-Chul Han warns in The Burnout Society, this relentless stimulation doesn't make us freer, it exhausts us. We become prisoners of choice, overloaded by options but disconnected from intention. In such a climate, choosing stillness over stimulation is not simply difficult, it's radical. It reclaims agency in a system built to erode it. The Stoics offer a path forward here, urging us to separate what is within our control from what is not. Our attention, despite the noise, remains within that sphere. Epictetus might ask, What is distracting you, and what are you allowing to distract you? The responsibility to direct our awareness inward, to attend to our thoughts, actions, and values, is a central tenet of Stoic discipline. To turn away from endless novelty and turn toward clarity is to live deliberately, not reactively. Absurdism, too, provides a powerful lens. Camus reminds us that the absurd hero does not escape the absurd. They live within it, fully aware. In a world that makes no promises of fairness or coherence, the choice to remain awake, to resist numbness, nihilism, or mindless consumption is an act of rebellion. When we anchor ourselves in attention, we are not escaping absurdity. We are confronting it with lucidity. That is the moral power of presence. It allows us to say, even if life is without ultimate meaning, I will still attend to it as if it matters. In a universe devoid of inherent meaning, it's easy to drift into distraction as a defense against the void. Why linger in presence when it reminds us of mortality, futility, the weight of freedom? Camus, however, did not advocate for escape. He urged us to live lucidly, to look at the absurd with unflinching eyes. The literal meaning of life is whatever you're doing that prevents you from killing yourself, he wrote with irony but also truth. Attention is one way we bear witness to the absurd without surrendering to it. It's how we participate in life, even when it has no script. But presence isn't just about witnessing, it's about affirming the humanity in front of us. When I sit across from someone and truly listen, not waiting to speak, not checking my phone, not performing interest, but listening as if they matter, I am making a moral statement. You are worthy of attention. You are not a background character in my story. You are a subject of your own. In a distracted world, this kind of attention is rare and therefore sacred. It's also incredibly difficult. Our minds race, our devices beckon, our schedules overflow. We multitask not out of malice, but out of habit, and habit becomes character over time. To reclaim presence requires discipline, not the rigid kind that stifles joy, but the kind that liberates us from the tyranny of constant motion. As behavioral economist Dan Ariely has shown, we routinely make irrational decisions about our time because we undervalue long-term fulfillment in favor of short-term stimulation. Presence asks us to reverse that, to choose depth over novelty, stillness over noise. There's something deeply counterintuitive here. The more we chase experiences, the more fragmented we become. The more we commit to one thing at a time, the more expansive life feels. That's why presence feels like a paradox. It's small, just this moment, this breath, this conversation. But it opens into something vast, like standing still and realizing you're moving with the rotation of the earth. It's in these grounded moments that life reveals its depth. Presence doesn't add anything external. It doesn't change your circumstances, but it radically shifts your relationship to them. It makes an ordinary meal feel sacred. It makes silence feel full. It makes a difficult conversation feel bearable. When we are fully engaged with what is, even the mundane takes on a kind of luminosity. This is what the Stoics meant when they spoke of aligning with nature, not escaping the moment, but merging with it. Modern psychology affirms this ancient insight. Studies on flow states, those moments of deep immersion in activity, show that our greatest sense of fulfillment often arises not from variety or stimulation, but from focused attention. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's research suggests that meaning comes not from the external novelty of what we do, but from the internal quality of how we do it. Presence, then, isn't passive. It's an active engagement with life that invites coherence where there was once distraction. The absurdist, too, might recognize this paradox. In a universe that offers no ultimate explanation, it is precisely in the act of presence that we push back against meaninglessness. We become like Sisyphus, aware of the weight of the stone and the futility of the hill, but still feeling the sun on our skin and the texture of the earth beneath our feet. We do not escape the absurd, we inhabit it with attention. And in that quiet defiance, something like meaning begins to emerge. And yet, presence isn't a retreat from the world, it's a way of showing up for it. When we're fully present, we're more likely to act with justice, to speak with clarity, to respond with empathy. We're less reactive, less performative, more rooted. The Stoics might call this prohairesis, the capacity to choose our response regardless of circumstance. The absurdists might call it rebellion, the refusal to turn away from reality even when it wounds us. It also transforms the mundane. Doing the dishes, driving to work, waiting in line, these are not obstacles to life but part of it. Presence dignifies the ordinary. It says, this too matters. This too is worth my attention. And in that shift, we find a kind of peace. Not a denial of suffering, but a steadiness that says, I am here, and that is enough. Practicing presence doesn't require a monastery or a retreat center. It begins in the smallest of choices, noticing your breath, putting your phone down at dinner, making eye contact, finishing a task before starting another, saying no to noise, saying yes to silence. These are not grand gestures, but they are deeply moral ones. They shape the quality of our lives and the texture of our relationships. Presence also makes us better learners. Wisdom, after all, depends on our ability to see clearly, and we cannot see clearly if our attention is scattered. Self-reflection, a theme that runs through this book, requires presence. So does compassion. So does every virtue we've explored. Without presence, virtue is theoretical. With it, virtue becomes lived experience. There's a quiet courage in presence too. To be present is to feel, and to feel is to risk discomfort, vulnerability, even grief. But to numb ourselves is to miss life entirely. Courage, then, is not always about heroic action. Sometimes it's about staying in the room, staying in the moment, staying with ourselves. In the end, presence is not a skill to master, but a relationship to cultivate. With the world, with others, with ourselves. It asks for tenderness, for patience, for humility. And like all relationships, it deepens with time and attention. We might ask ourselves, as Marcus Aurelius did, are you distracted? Then make use of this moment to learn something worthwhile. Stop letting your attention be stolen by trivialities. That is the call of presence, not to flee the absurd, but to meet it fully awake. And perhaps that is one of the greatest gifts we can offer, to ourselves and to one another. Not advice, not answers, but attention, real, sustained, embodied attention. Because to be present is to care, and to care is to live with virtue. 5 things to consider. Presence is a moral choice, not just a mental state. Choosing to be fully present with another person or within your own experience is an ethical commitment to dignity, respect, and attentiveness. In a world of constant distraction, this choice carries weight. Attention is finite, and others are constantly trying to claim it. Behavioral economics reminds us that our attention is a scarce resource. Companies, platforms, and systems compete to monetize it. Reclaiming it is an act of autonomy and resistance. Distraction dehumanizes, presence rehumanizes. When we divide our attention, we reduce others and ourselves to background noise. Being present means honoring the full humanity of those we interact with and refusing to live in half-noticed moments. Small acts of mindfulness create large shifts in perception. You don't need to overhaul your life to reclaim presence. Simply noticing your breath, your thoughts, or your surroundings can recalibrate your inner compass and foster virtue in motion. Living with intention combats the fragmentation of the modern age. Choosing to attend to one task, one person, one moment, pushes back against the chaos of modern life. It anchors us, makes our actions meaningful, and reinforces the practice of wisdom, courage, justice, and discipline. Reflection. Questions. When was the last time I gave someone my full, undivided attention? What did that feel like, for me and for them? What are the main forces in my life that pull my attention away from the present moment? How do they affect my relationships and inner peace? In what ways do I use distraction to avoid discomfort, uncertainty, or vulnerability? What might I be missing by doing so? How can I cultivate small daily habits that strengthen my capacity for presence, such as mindful breathing, single tasking, or listening without interruption? Do I treat attention as a form of care in my relationships, my work, and my self-reflection? What would change if I did? Chapter 11. The Long View, Living Virtuously Over a Lifetime. The good for man is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue, in a complete life. Aristotle. In an age that prizes immediacy and instant gratification, the idea of living virtuously over a lifetime might seem quaint, even outdated. Yet virtue has never been about quick wins or momentary recognition. True virtue is not a fixed achievement to be ticked off a list, but rather an evolving practice, a lifelong journey that matures with time, deepens with experience, and ultimately shapes not just who we are, but what we leave behind. To see virtue as a static state is to misunderstand its essence. One does not simply become virtuous in the way one earns a degree or achieves a promotion. Instead, virtue is more akin to a garden that requires continual tending. Even the most disciplined and principled individuals encounter moments of failure, doubt, and contradiction. These are not signs of moral inadequacy, but invitations to deeper growth. Early in life, our understanding of virtue is often simplistic and externally motivated. We may seek approval from authority figures, conform to rules, or strive to appear good to others. As we age, however, our motivations tend to shift. Life experiences, including suffering, disappointment, love, and loss, begin to shape our values in more nuanced ways. Virtue becomes less about performance and more about alignment, the inner coherence between what we believe and how we live. Practicing virtue over a lifetime means accepting the inevitability of imperfection. It means recommitting ourselves to growth, not because we expect to reach some ideal end state, but because the practice itself is worthy. It is in the striving, the ongoing effort to act with integrity, humility, courage, and compassion, that virtue becomes real. Our moral compass does not remain static throughout life. Childhood is often guided by a black-and-white understanding of right and wrong. Adolescence brings a confrontation with complexity, as we begin to question inherited norms and carve out our own identities. In young adulthood, idealism often runs high, sometimes paired with a sense of invincibility. But as we navigate the middle years, with their mix of responsibility, disappointment, and fulfillment, our vision of virtue often becomes more tempered, grounded, and relational. With age comes the recognition that virtue is not always about grand gestures. Sometimes it means holding our tongue instead of insisting on the last word. It may involve forgiveness, not because the other person deserves it, but because carrying resentment corrodes our own spirit. Virtue in later life often expresses itself in patience, presence, and quiet resilience. We also become more aware of the social dimensions of virtue. How we contribute to our families, communities, and institutions begins to matter more. The question becomes not just what kind of person do I want to be, but what kind of impact do I want to have on others? As we gain experience, we may also see that some virtues rise in importance. Courage, for instance, becomes essential not only in times of crisis, but in daily decisions to stand up for our values. Humility deepens as we recognize our limitations and the vastness of what we do not know. Compassion expands as we bear witness to the suffering of others and face our own. To live virtuously over a lifetime means ultimately facing the reality of death. Mortality is not a comfortable subject in modern culture, which often seeks to delay, deny, or distract from it. Yet it is in confronting our finitude that we often find our deepest clarity. The awareness of death can sharpen our sense of what truly matters. It invites us to live intentionally rather than reactively, to prioritize relationships over achievements, and to invest in what endures. Courage, in this context, is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face the unknown with openness and resolve. Wisdom, too, is a virtue uniquely cultivated over time. It draws not just on knowledge, but on lived experience, reflection, and a willingness to integrate both joy and sorrow. Those who face the end of life with wisdom often exude a serenity that inspires others. They are not without pain or regret, but they have made peace with impermanence. They leave behind not just memories, but models of how to live and die with grace. Legacy is often thought of in terms of achievements, possessions, or accolades. But the most enduring legacies are those of character. The stories people tell about us, the values we pass on, and the example we set in how we loved, led, and lived. These are what endure. Living virtuously over a lifetime is the foundation for such a legacy. It means being remembered not just for what we did, but for how we made others feel. Not just for what we believed, but for how we embodied those beliefs in everyday life. This legacy begins in small, often unnoticed acts. A listening ear, a forgiving heart, a courageous stand for what is right. Over time, these acts accumulate into a life of substance. They shape not only our own journey, but the journeys of those who come after us. Ultimately, the long view of virtue invites us to ask enduring questions. How can I grow in love and wisdom? What values will guide my choices today and tomorrow? What kind of ancestor do I want to be? Living virtuously over a lifetime is not a path of perfection, but of purpose. It is not measured in flawless outcomes, but in faithful striving. And in the end, it is this striving, this long, humble, courageous walk toward the good, that defines a life well lived. To live virtuously over a lifetime is to recognize that the soul, like the natural world, moves through seasons. There are times of growth and vibrancy, times of pruning and rest, times of darkness and rebirth. Each season offers its own moral and spiritual lessons, and each calls for a different kind of virtue. In youth, the dominant virtues may be curiosity, courage, and ambition, the drive to explore, to assert oneself, to discover what is possible. These are essential for stepping into the world and finding one's voice. However, without guidance and temperance, youthful energy can veer into recklessness or arrogance. The role of mentors then becomes crucial, not to stifle youth, but to nurture discernment alongside boldness. Middle age often brings the challenge of sustaining commitments, relationships, careers, community responsibilities. Here, virtues like fidelity, patience, and perseverance become more prominent. This season can feel heavy, with fewer dramatic milestones and more quiet endurance. Yet it is in these years that much of a life's ethical weight is born. The capacity to continue doing what is right, day after day, with little fanfare, is a profound expression of virtue. In later years, the virtues of reflection, generosity, and detachment take center stage. As the horizon narrows, the soul often turns inward and upward, seeking meaning beyond personal gain or ambition. Elders who have lived thoughtfully may become sources of wisdom and calm, offering perspective that only time can teach. They show us how to let go, not only of youth or status, but of control, and how to do so with grace. No one walks the path of virtue alone. While the inner life is essential, virtue also lives and breathes in relationship. With family, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and strangers. Community challenges and refines us, holding up mirrors to our strengths and shortcomings alike. It also sustains us, offering encouragement, correction, and companionship. Living virtuously over a lifetime requires a supportive moral ecology. We need role models who embody integrity, institutions that reward ethical behavior, and cultural narratives that lift up character over celebrity. When virtue is affirmed by the communities we inhabit, it becomes more sustainable, less about heroic individualism and more about shared commitment. This does not mean conforming passively to our surroundings. Sometimes living virtuously requires dissent, resisting injustice, challenging harmful norms, or choosing the harder path when others opt for ease. In these moments, a lifetime of moral practice pays off. We draw from a reservoir of inner strength built up over years of thoughtful living. We also lean on the wisdom and courage of others, past and present, who have walked similar roads. A central paradox of a virtuous life is that the more seriously one pursues it, the more conscious one becomes of falling short. This is not a sign of regression, but of maturation. With increased moral clarity comes greater awareness of complexity, contradiction, and our own limitations. To live virtuously over a lifetime is to grow more honest about our failures, not in a spirit of shame, but of humility. Mistakes, if faced squarely, can become moral teachers. They remind us of our shared humanity, deepen our compassion for others, and prevent the corrosive effects of pride. Moreover, failure teaches resilience. A life of virtue is not a straight line, but a spiral, circling back, revisiting old lessons with new depth, recovering from missteps with renewed intention. This cyclical process is how wisdom is forged. It is also what makes virtue accessible to all, regardless of background or past. As we age, we often begin to see our lives as stories, narratives marked by plot twists, reversals, and grace notes. The chapters of failure, once sources of regret, may come to be seen as turning points that clarified our values or softened our hearts. This narrative reframing is itself a moral act, an expression of mercy toward ourselves and others. In the latter stages of life, many feel a call not only to live virtuously, but to pass on what they have learned. This transmission does not require a platform or title. It requires presence, intentionality, and care. We teach virtue most powerfully through example. Children, students, and peers are more shaped by how we live than by what we say. A parent who models patience in frustration teaches more than 100 lectures on emotional regulation. A leader who apologizes sincerely teaches humility more effectively than any policy statement. Stories also play a critical role. The tales we tell about ancestors, personal trials, moments of decision become moral compasses for those who hear them. They do not need to be heroic to be impactful. Often it is the quiet victories, the times we chose love over anger, service over self-interest, that resonate most deeply. In a time when many young people are disillusioned by hypocrisy and craving authenticity, the simple act of living one's values can be profoundly countercultural. To the extent that we embody what we believe, we give others permission to do the same. As the end of life draws near, one of the greatest moral and spiritual challenges is learning to let go, not only of possessions and roles, but of control, certainty, and even identity. This can be a deeply painful process, especially in cultures that equate worth with productivity or relevance. Yet it is also a profound spiritual opportunity. Letting go is not a passive resignation, but an active form of surrender, rooted in trust, in the belief that our worth is not diminished by our limitations. It is a final act of virtue, the courage to face the unknown, the humility to release control, the faith to believe that our life has mattered. This surrender is made easier when one has lived with intention. A person who has spent decades cultivating love, justice, truth, and grace leaves this world more lightly. Their legacy is not one of unfinished striving, but of completed offering, a gift handed down through presence, values, and example. In the end, the measure of a virtuous life is not perfection, status, or acclaim. It is whether we have grown in love, whether we have shown up fully, flawed but faithful, whether we have, in our own way, made the world more just, kind, and humane. Living virtuously over a lifetime is a kind of art, a slow, deliberate shaping of the self in relationship to others and to the world. It requires patience, courage, and resilience. It is marked by countless small decisions, invisible sacrifices, and moments of grace. And though it may never earn headlines or monuments, such a life is the bedrock of a flourishing society. It is the quiet force that holds communities together, heals wounds, and keeps hope alive. It is, in the truest sense, a good life, and a legacy that endures far beyond our final breath. 5 things to consider. Virtue is a lifelong journey, not a destination. Virtue is not something we attain once and for all, but a continuous, evolving practice. It requires constant reflection, recommitment, and growth through all stages of life. Rather than striving for perfection, we are called to pursue alignment between our values and actions over time. Aging deepens our moral understanding. As we move through life's stages, from youth to old age, our view of virtue matures. Experience brings complexity, shifting our moral lens from rigid ideals to relational wisdom. With age, we often find that quiet acts of integrity, patience, and compassion carry greater weight than dramatic gestures. Mortality brings moral clarity. Facing the reality of death prompts us to live more intentionally. It sharpens our sense of what truly matters, relationships, character, and legacy, and invites us to embody virtues like courage and wisdom. Preparing for death with grace becomes a final, profound act of moral leadership. Our legacy is rooted in daily virtue. What we leave behind is not measured by status or possessions, but by how we've lived our values. Small, consistent acts of goodness shape the memories others carry and the values they inherit. Our choices become part of a moral legacy that extends across generations. Community sustains and challenges virtue. We do not live virtuously in isolation. Relationships and communities provide the feedback, accountability, and inspiration necessary for moral growth. They also present the contexts in which virtues are tested and practiced. Living well means engaging with others in a way that is both honest and supportive. Reflection questions. How has your understanding of virtue changed over time, and what life experiences have most shaped that evolution? Reflect on moments in your life that challenged or deepened your values. What virtues have become more important to you as you've aged? In what ways are you intentionally cultivating virtue in your daily life, even when no one is watching? Consider the small, often invisible choices you make each day. How do they reflect the kind of person you want to be? What does it mean to you to face mortality with courage and wisdom? Think about your current relationship with the idea of death. How might embracing your finitude shape the way you live today? What legacy of character would you like to leave behind for the next generation? Imagine how you would want to be remembered, not for your accomplishments, but for your way of being. What values do you hope to pass on? Who in your life models long-term virtue, and what have you learned from their example? Reflect on mentors, elders, or peers who live with integrity. What practices or mindsets do they embody that you aspire to cultivate? Chapter 12. Choosing virtue, choosing strength. Courage is the first of human qualities because it is the quality which guarantees the others. Friedrich Nietzsche. In a world where change is constant, uncertainty is inevitable, and chaos often feels like the dominant force, the pursuit of virtue can appear not only outdated but naive. Why speak of integrity, compassion, or courage when cruelty often wins and indifference rules the day? What strength is there in humility, or in love, or in truth, when the loudest, most ruthless voices seem to carry the greatest influence? And yet, it is precisely in such times that the choice to live virtuously becomes not just meaningful, but radical. To choose virtue is to choose strength, not the strength of domination or control, but the deeper, quieter strength that roots us in who we are and what we stand for, regardless of the chaos around us. When the external world is turbulent, virtue provides inner stability. In times of crisis, those who have cultivated patience, integrity, and resilience become beacons of calm and clarity. Virtue acts like an anchor. It doesn't stop the storm, but it keeps us from being swept away by it. Consider the person who, amidst political upheaval, chooses to speak with honesty rather than hatred, or the one who, in the face of corporate greed, insists on fairness and transparency. These choices may not make headlines, but they preserve a sense of self. They remind us that we are not powerless. Virtue is not a reaction, it is a grounding. It gives us the ability to respond rather than merely react. In a culture addicted to outrage and speed, virtue slows us down. It asks us to think, to discern, to choose wisely rather than impulsively. This is not weakness, it is not retreat. It is strength, the kind that cannot be bought or imposed, but must be built from within. The kind of strength that resists cynicism, that persists through suffering, and that carries others when they falter. Virtue is not static. It is not a badge one earns and wears forever. It is a practice, and like any practice, it demands consistency, humility, and reflection. Choosing virtue means choosing the lifelong path of self-examination and moral development. This path requires courage. It means asking difficult questions. Where have I failed to live up to my values? What assumptions need to be challenged? How have I contributed to harm, even unintentionally? These questions are not meant to induce shame, but to promote awareness. They are how we grow. In a world obsessed with image and certainty, self-reflection is countercultural. It demands honesty over ego and depth over appearance. It asks us to admit that we don't have all the answers, that we are works in progress. Growth often involves discomfort. It means confronting our biases, owning our mistakes, and changing course when necessary. But the alternative is stagnation, and stagnation is the slow death of the soul. Virtue keeps us alive, not just physically, but morally and spiritually. Practicing virtue also means remaining open to others. We do not grow in isolation. Feedback, dialogue, and community are essential. Others see what we cannot. Their insights and critiques, when offered in good faith, become mirrors in which we see ourselves more clearly. Philosophers like Camus and Kierkegaard have wrestled with the absurd, the tension between our desire for meaning and a universe that often offers none. In such a context, the pursuit of virtue may seem futile. Why act with integrity when nothing ultimately matters? Why strive for justice in a world that seems indifferent to suffering? Yet, this is where virtue becomes a form of rebellion. It is the refusal to collapse into nihilism. It is the insistence that, even if the universe does not care, we do. Even if the world does not reward goodness, we choose it anyway. To live virtuously in an absurd world is not to deny absurdity, but to confront it. To stare into the void and still choose love, still choose courage, still choose truth. This choice is not born of delusion, but of defiance. It is a declaration of agency. We may not control the outcome, but we control our response. And in that response, there is freedom. Virtue becomes the artist's brush, painting beauty on a canvas of chaos. It becomes the builder's hands, shaping meaning out of dust. It becomes the poet's pen, insisting that language matters even when words fail. Choosing virtue, then, is not passive. It is creative. It is existential resistance. It is how we assert our humanity in the face of absurdity. And so, dear reader, the invitation is this: choose virtue, not because it is easy or popular or immediately rewarding. Choose it because it is the only path that leads to inner coherence and outward integrity. Choose to examine your life, to ask the hard questions, to seek not comfort, but truth, to reject cynicism even when it is fashionable, to speak honestly even when it is costly, to love fiercely even when it makes you vulnerable. Let virtue be your anchor. Let it guide you through storms, and let it steady you when the ground beneath your feet feels uncertain. Let it remind you that you are not merely a product of your environment, but a participant in shaping the moral fabric of your world. Let it also remind you that you are not alone. Others are walking this path, faltering and rising, just like you. Seek them out. Learn from them. Support them. Be for them what you hope to find in others. To live a meaningful life in an indifferent universe is to recognize that meaning is not given, but made. It is to accept that the cosmos may not care for our virtues, but we do. And that is enough. We are meaning makers. Through our choices, relationships, sacrifices, and stories, we weave purpose into existence. Virtue gives this process direction. It aligns our inner compass with the good, even when the world is dark. There will be days when this path feels lonely, when cruelty seems to win, when the noise of the world drowns out the quiet voice of conscience. On those days, remember this: you are not striving in vain. Each act of goodness plants a seed. Each moment of integrity builds a foundation. Each choice to love is a light in the dark. And in the end, that is strength. Not the kind that shouts or conquers, but the kind that endures. The kind that holds space for others. The kind that remembers what matters when all else is stripped away. So choose virtue. Choose strength. Choose a life that, even in the face of absurdity, still burns with meaning, still dares to care, still reaches toward the good. That, in the end, is the most powerful rebellion of all. 5 things to consider. Virtue as a radical choice in chaotic times. The text emphasizes that choosing to live virtuously in a world dominated by cynicism, speed, and noise is not naive, but radical. Virtue becomes a deliberate act of strength, a form of resistance against chaos, cruelty, and meaninglessness. The role of virtue as an anchor. Virtue offers inner stability amidst external turmoil. Like an anchor in a storm, it helps individuals stay grounded in their values and identity, providing clarity and resilience even when the world feels uncertain or hostile. Commitment to lifelong self-examination. Virtue is not a fixed state, but a continuous practice. It requires humility, regular reflection, and the willingness to grow. This includes confronting personal failings, embracing discomfort, and remaining open to learning from others. Virtue as existential rebellion. Drawing from existential philosophy, the chapter frames virtue as an act of rebellion against an indifferent universe. In the face of absurdity, choosing to act with integrity, love, and courage becomes a defiant affirmation of human dignity and meaning. The creative power of meaning-making. Meaning is not passively received, but actively created through choices aligned with virtue. Even if the universe is silent, our actions and commitments imbue life with purpose, connecting us to others and affirming our shared humanity. Reflection questions. In what ways has chaos or uncertainty in your life tested your commitment to living virtuously? Reflect on a time when you were challenged to uphold your values despite external pressure or inner conflict. What virtues anchor you most during difficult times, and how do you cultivate them regularly? Consider which character traits help ground you and what practices help strengthen them. How do you respond to the idea that virtue is a form of rebellion in an indifferent or absurd universe? Do you find this idea empowering, daunting, or something else entirely? Why? What does self-examination look like in your life, and how has it helped you grow? Think about moments of honest reflection that led to meaningful change in your character or actions. In what ways are you actively creating meaning through your everyday choices and relationships? Explore how your values shape the way you engage with others and the world around you. Further reading. Foundational Stoic Texts. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. A timeless reflection on personal virtue, duty, and resilience amidst the challenges of life. Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. A rich collection of letters exploring ethics, suffering, and the pursuit of wisdom in everyday life. Discourses and selected writings by Epictetus. Practical teachings focused on self-control, clarity of purpose, and inner freedom. Core absurdist works. The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. Camus' foundational text on absurdism, exploring how to live with meaning despite the apparent absurdity of existence. The Rebel by Albert Camus. A philosophical and political examination of rebellion as an ethical stance in the face of absurdity. Fear and Trembling by Søren Kierkegaard. Though often associated with existentialism, Kierkegaard's work offers a profound take on personal struggle, faith, and the absurd leap. Bridging the Two Traditions. Embrace the Absurd with Grace, How Stoicism and Absurdism Can Help Us Handle the Absurdity of Our Existence by John Morrison. A guide that helps you lean into struggle using Stoicism and Absurdism. How to Be an Existentialist by Gary Cox. A readable and practical introduction to existential thinking with themes that parallel both Stoic and absurdist insights. A Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy by William B. Irvine. A modern introduction to Stoic philosophy, including its relevance to modern existential challenges. At the Existentialist Cafe by Sarah Bakewell. A compelling narrative history of existential thought, useful for understanding how Stoicism and Absurdism might intersect with broader philosophical movements. The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman. A practical day-by-day Stoic reflection guide that helps readers apply ancient wisdom to contemporary life, particularly useful when paired with absurdist realism. Modern Reflections on Meaning and Chaos. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. A powerful exploration of finding purpose in suffering, bridging existential thought and the lived experience of moral resilience. The Happiness of Pursuit by Shimon Edelman. An accessible philosophical and neuroscientific inquiry into how humans create meaning, useful for those merging Stoic discipline with absurdist defiance. Camus and the Meaning of Life by Robert Zaretsky. A concise and insightful guide to Camus' thought, with emphasis on how to live ethically and meaningfully without illusions.